Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Teed family. What was supposed to be a peaceful holiday turned into a terrible nightmare, leaving the survivors with scars that would never heal. When the Teed family set out for their remote house to celebrate Christmas, they had no idea that their trip would lead them into a tragedy few could have imagined. So, what happened to them? Join me as we explore the story of today's case. Rolf Teede was born in Germany. When he was just 11 years old, he and his mother moved to the United States. Shortly after their arrival, his mother remarried and chose to begin a new life following her first unsuccessful marriage. Rolf was a quiet boy who excelled in his studies. When he started college, he met Kay. They were both studying similar subjects and shared similar life views. Like Rolf, Kay was calm and sociable, and she dreamed of building her American dream and starting a family with someone who shared her values. Rolf quickly seemed like the perfect match for her. They had so much in common that after their first meeting, they became inseparable. At this point, Rolf was just over 20 years old. Both of them had serious intentions for their future, and their parents supported their relationship, which was progressing well. The two of them decided to move to a new home and began a journey across the country. They first lived in Nevada, then in Utah, but this was just the start. As they traveled to various locations, Rolf and Kay enjoyed their time together and eventually chose to get married. Shortly after, they started planning their next move, looking for a larger house and considering starting a family. In 1963, the young couple moved to the small town of Humble, Texas, which had a population of around 10,000. They were dedicated members of the Christian church, loved children, and aspired to have a large family. They quickly became part of the local community and earned the respect of those around them. Unfortunately, the Teede couple faced challenges that prevented them from having children for many years. However, they found a solution. They decided to adopt. After adopting their second child, Kay was surprised to find out that she was pregnant again, which they viewed as a miracle. The pregnancy was so subtle that she didn't even realize it. She later gave birth to a healthy daughter named Trish. The family enjoyed a fulfilling life and happy, having everything they needed to cherish their time together. Rolf excelled in trading and had dreamed of starting his own business since his student days. By the time their children were born, he was earning a good income, which allowed Kay to stay home and focus on raising the children. Thanks to his hard work and entrepreneurial spirit, Rolf opened a company in 1969 that quickly became part of the Houston retail market. With their financial stability, they eventually purchased a house in Utah, a small town with just over 500 residents in the 1990s. The mountainous area felt peaceful and secluded. They found a beautiful house perched high in the mountains, and it was considered very safe, much quieter than the nearby towns. The locals were well acquainted with one another, and their family seamlessly integrated into this community. The house was located about 4 kilometers from the nearest road. A beautiful river flowed nearby, with trees lining both banks. Despite the transportation challenges, especially in winter, their family made it a tradition to spend the entire Christmas holiday there every year. To reach the house, they would leave their car in a parking lot near the road and use snowmobiles to travel up into the mountains, as this was the quickest way to get there. By December 1990, their family's routine had not changed. They planned to return to their forest house for the Christmas holidays. On December 20th, Kay and her son, Sean, flew from Texas to Oakley, where her sister Claudia Tidwell Nelson picked her up. Claudia drove her so they could wait together for the others. Rolf, Line, and Trish were scheduled to arrive the following evening, December 21st. Typically, Rolf wrapped up his work before the vacation, while Kay visited her sister Claudia to help organize the gathering and prepare food and supplies for their trip to the mountains. At the usual spot where they parked their cars to switched modes of transportation, Kay and Claudia noticed a young man who looked suspicious. Even though it was freezing outside, he was wearing light shoes and a thin shirt, which was quite odd. They offered to assist him, but he didn't respond and instead walked faster, quickly disappearing from view. They reached their house just before sunset and had dinner. Claudia chose to stay overnight. In the morning, thinking she saw a figure outside the window. Claudia and Kay searched for any signs outside but found nothing. It appeared that someone had used their paths without being seen. Ultimately, they chose to focus on getting ready for the busy weekend ahead. On December 21st, by the time Rolf and his daughters arrived, everything is almost ready. Kay shared details about recent events, including a suspicious person she had encountered while with Claudia. She felt particularly uneasy about this stranger, who seemed to belong to the area. Kay suggested that Rolf take hunting rifles and transport them to the house on a snowmobile, just in case something unexpected occurred. However, Rolf declined, believing there was no need for such precautions. He felt confident that everything would be fine and thought that carrying weapons in everyday life was too dangerous. In fact, Rolf lacked experience with rifles and pistols. He mentioned that this area has been the safest in the last 100 years. In the suburbs, there has only been one incident, which was not even related to gunfire. Despite some aggressive driving and poor behavior on the roads, there have only been a few robberies over several decades. Unfortunately, he was unaware of how dangerous some people in the area had become. Kay expressed that something was off, so she decided to take precautions. She grabbed a couple of rifles and loaded them onto the snowmobile, saying it would make her feel safer. Her husband did not object. An adult among the teenagers helped move their belongings into the house. Claudia left in the morning to buy supplies she had forgotten for the upcoming holiday. Kay and Rolf decorated their home and prepared for a celebration. Because they lacked some necessities, they decided to go to the city to buy more. At this time, Sean, feeling overwhelmed by the busyness, asked to stay the night with his Aunt Claudia, which likely helped him relax. After dropping Sean off, their family visited Kay's mother, Beth. At that time, she was 72 years old, had poor eyesight, and was partially paralyzed due to a car accident earlier that year. Kay and her family visited her regularly and often took her to their home. This visit was no different. They spent the evening talking and enjoying each other's company, preparing to leave for the mountains the next day. On December 2nd, around noon, Teed family went to town. It was a particularly frosty day. The group then split up. Rolf and Trish planned to return to the cabin, while Kay, Linny, and Beth walked towards their house in the mountains. The two groups ended up about 2 hours apart. Kay and Linny arrived at their destination first and intended to set up a chair. While stopping near the garage, Linny noticed a dark figure in the main bedroom. Mistaking it for her cousin David, she didn't think much of it. Linny ran in, immediately turned on the hot water to warm her hands, and with her peripheral vision, she saw a dark figure hiding behind the refrigerator. Thinking it was just David, trying to scare her, she laughed to herself. However, when the figure stepped into the light, she realized it wasn't David at all. It was a young man with curly hair, he pointing a gun at her. She attempted to alert the others, but they had already noticed the armed intruder. Kay felt powerless against the intruder, regretted not grabbing a gun from the garage. He commanded Linny to help her grandmother and mother go upstairs. Beth, with her daughter and granddaughter, struggled to ascend to the second floor, worried that the intruder might start attacking if they didn't hurry. Another man wearing glasses appeared, also holding a weapon. Kay panicked, pleaded for their lives, promising to give anything. Without hesitation, the stranger man with curly hair attacked her by force. She fell to the ground, screaming in pain. The assailant attacked her several more times. Then, he aimed the gun at Beth and also attacked by force her in the face. Surprisingly, Beth did not die. She collapsed but quickly tried to get back up. The thug attacked her again multiple times. He confused about needing to use so many bullets, while another man seemed to enjoy the chaos. Leni prepared for her own fate, but unexpectedly, she was taken to the bedroom. The intruders gagged her with a dirty sock and tied her hands and feet. One of the two strangers brought a dog and handed over for Leni, claiming it would calm her down. They left her and returned to their shot victims. Gang leader continues to attack Kay and Beth, then took all the jewelry from the dead and emptied their pockets of valuables. They dragged the bodies outside, leaving them in front of Leni. She had just witnessed her grandmother and mother die. Simultaneously, she realized her father and younger sister would be home soon. She was in danger herself and wanted to warn them, but there was no time. At 2:45 p.m., Rolf and Trish rode snowmobiles back to the house. Sean still lives with Claudia. Meanwhile, the killers were waiting for new victims, and one of them held a weapon to Leni's head, threatening to kill her if she made a sound. When Rolf entered the house, he saw Leni being used as a human shield by an armed man who had a weapon pressed to her head. The strangers confronted Rolf and the rest in the living room. The newcomers immediately noticed the bodies of their loved ones and wanted to help, but the attackers prevented them from doing so. In a desperate attempt, Rolf began emptying his pockets, giving the criminals cash and his expensive watch. However, the leader ordered his partner to attack Rolf. The second attacker hesitated, clearly reluctant to get involved. Finally, the leader aimed his pistol and pulled the trigger, but it only clicked. He tried again, and still nothing happened. The third time, he succeeded in attacking Rolf. Trish panicked to see her father collapse to the floor, bleeding. The attackers then searched Trish's bag, but did nothing to her. Instead of escalating the violence, the criminals took Leni and Trish to a bedroom, then locked them inside. They found canisters of gasoline stored in the house for snowmobiles, and began pouring it everywhere. They chatted casually, unwrapped Teed family's gifts, and filmed their antics with a camera they found in the home. They even enjoyed a festive meal prepared by Kay. It seemed they had planned to destroy all evidence of their presence, and they acted nonchalantly. They then returned to Rolf. The leader attacked him in the back of the head again, and subsequently poured gasoline over his body as well. The criminals ordered Trish and Leni to load all the stolen items onto snowmobiles, which were in the garage. They didn't use gasoline to set the garage on fire, as they needed it for their escape. A guy loaded his gun, unbuttoned his jacket, and revealed a knife. Leni noticed this, and he assured her. The criminals then set fire to the house and drove away with the two girls as hostages. While driving the snowmobiles, Trish and Leni considered their options for escaping. They thought about crashing into a tree or causing an accident to get rid of their captors, but they couldn't come up with a plan. During this time, their uncle, Randy Zorn, was driving his car to the Teed family home. He encountered the snowmobile carrying criminals and waved to them, thinking they were familiar faces, possibly his nieces with their boyfriends. However, he was taken aback when they didn't respond to his greeting. Normally, Leni and Trish were respectful and would greet him back. The criminals didn't recognize Randy and simply drove past him. In the parking lot, the strangers transferred the girls into Teed family's car. It was the car Rolf brought the food to. They filled with fear that the experience of their death would be painful. With no other choice, they complied and took their seats in the back of the car. Randy also arrived in the parking lot and waved to them. However, Leni and Trish ignored him because they feared he might become the next target of the killers. The leader of the group noticed Randy and asking Leni if she knew him. She responded that she did not recognize the man. Right after that, the car carrying the hostages left the scene. A moment later, Randy saw a man coming. There was severe frost, but he was without a jacket, without shoes, and even without a hat. It seemed his face was literally torn apart, with drops of blood frozen on him and his face swollen. Randy recognized it was Rolf. Rolf told of the attack on his family. Remarkably, he survived and managed to escape to the parking lot in an effort. He said, "The attackers broke into his house in the woods, doused it with gasoline, and set it on fire. The fire quickly spread, but Rolf pretended to be dead and waited until the chaos died down before taking action. He initially tried to put out the fire, but the fire spread quickly due to the gasoline, causing his jacket to catch fire. He ran into the bathroom, took it off and suffering only minor burns. Fortunately, the garage was not on fire." Driven by the desire to save his daughters, Rolf pursued the kidnappers for 4 kilometers, despite being injured and having impaired vision. He knew the route well enough to reach his destination, but he clearly needed urgent medical attention. Randy put him in the car and drove towards the city, but the medical center was too far away. Randy fears that there may not be enough time to save Rolf's life. He called emergency services, requesting the helicopter and reporting a fire. Meanwhile, the criminals with the hostages were heading towards the canyon. Suddenly, a patrol car passed by them. The police car quickly turned around and began to follow the criminals. The kidnappers ignored the officers' demands to stop and sped up to 150 km/h. With the bad weather and slippery roads, the situation was extremely dangerous. The criminals trying to escape from the police drove past a checkpoint. Several patrol cars joined the chase, and about half an hour later, the criminals got stuck on an embankment. They attempted to climb out to flee. Meanwhile, Linnae and Trish seized the opportunity to escape, ran towards the police. When the hostages are safe, a brief shootout ensued. Linnae pleaded with the police to handle the attackers who had killed her mother, father, and grandmother. The criminals surrendered immediately. Both were detained without sustaining injuries. Meanwhile, doctors arrived quickly by helicopter to take Rolf to the hospital. They fought to save his life. Despite being attacked in the face and then in the back of the head, Rolf miraculously survived the attack and remained conscious for most of it. He later recovered without experiencing severe consequences from his injuries. Right after that, firefighters fought the fire. The house did not burn down completely, but the property was seriously damaged. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they described it as the most terrible thing they had seen during their work. There was blood all around, with the bodies of the victims left inside the house, was a terrible smell of burnt corpses' flesh. Here they find cameras recording footage of the criminals holding the victims and laughing at them. Based on camera footage, the criminals were arrested, and they are only 25 years old. The killer himself, Von Taylor, had curly hair and was the instigator. Both guys had served time in the Utah State Prison before this crime. In there, Taylor for burglary and arson, while his partner, Edward Deli, had less serious charges. They met each other in a rehabilitation center where they were sent shortly before the end of their prison term. Here, they were prepared to start life from scratch without crime. However, instead, a cunning and bloody plan was born in the minds of the criminals. They escaped from the rehabilitation center instead of integrating into society. On December 14, the thugs hitchhiked to Oakley, where Taylor's father had his own house. There, they spent about a week planning the robbery. In fact, on the day of their arrival at Tidy's house, Kay saw a suspicious guy in the parking lot. Without outerwear, he was just examining the nearby houses in search of another target for robbery. Kay and Beth immediately attracted his attention. On December 22, the criminals broke into the house of the Tidy family when they left for the city. The attackers behaved like the owners, even having fun murders and thefts. They decided to use Trish and Linnae as human shields, planning to get to New York, then get rid of the hostages and disappear into the big city. On January 22, Taylor and Deli were officially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping. In addition, there are other crimes including theft, arson, and resisting arrest. not to mention escaping from a correctional facility. Both immediately said they had mental problems. However, the examination did not reveal any mental abnormalities in them. They were simply stalling for time. 5 months later, Taylor pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder in exchange for all other charges being dropped. Taylor admitted at trial that he was the mastermind behind all of this. He attacked Beth and Kay and felt no remorse. The medical examiner found that Kay had 5 wounds, and Beth also was struck by 3 bullets. Rolfe was attacked in the face and then doused with gasoline. When Rolfe entered the courtroom, Taylor recognized him. Taylor's face was frozen in surprise, even cursed, and could not believe that Rolfe had survived. Ultimately, Taylor was sentenced to death. Despite the confession of the mastermind, Edward Delly pleaded not guilty and decided to appear in court. 2 weeks after Taylor was convicted of murder, Delly's trial began. He had no idea that Rolfe had survived, but he from the very beginning showed remorse and insisted that he was not involved in the deaths. He did not kill anyone. According to him, the original plan was to rob, and Delly did not expect that Taylor would start killing. He refused to shoot anyone. Naturally, the prosecution tried to portray Delly as exactly the same cruel person as Taylor. He insisted that he could not pull the trigger. This meant that Rolfe, who had witnessed the events, could be the defendant's only chance to escape from a lethal injection. Delly's lawyer tried every way to present a favorable picture for him. Linnea also testified in court. She remembered how Delly brought a dog into her room, saying that it should calm her down. Also, he talked to her and Trish to reassure them. It was he who told them to get out of the car when the car stopped. When the court agency discussed finding Delly guilty of second-degree murder, it meant that he received a life sentence, but with the right to parole. The Teade family filed a lawsuit against the state. They wanted compensation for the deaths of Kay and Beth. According to the survivors, it was the state leadership that was to blame for the escape that the prisoners made from the rehabilitation center, because this led to the bloody massacre. In fact, the claims were quite justified. It became known that on December 22, Von Taylor called his friend named Scott Manley. He told Scott that he and Delly had escaped from a rehabilitation center and also stolen a weapon. Scott admitted that by that time, Taylor and Delly had already robbed several houses in Oakley and now intended to deal with an entire family. Scott was afraid of their intentions and immediately contacted law enforcement officers, telling them about Taylor's confessions. Despite this, the police simply ignored the message. Unfortunately, the court rejected the Teade family's claims, and no one was punished for their negligence. In 2001, Linnea received a letter from Delly in which he asked for forgiveness. He wrote that life in prison had changed him. Before, he was just a stupid young man who followed the example of a friend who showed him a cool lifestyle. Linnea read this letter over and over again, in tears and with hatred. Finally, 10 years later, she decided to throw off the burden and wrote a response to Delly, in which she stated that she forgave him. After that, she felt much better. After the verdict was passed, Delly did not try to appeal the court's decision. Most likely, he will never be released from prison, given the severity of the crime in which he took part. Meanwhile, Taylor has filed 4 appeals. He cited various reasons, including the bias of the jury. All these absurd appeals were rejected. However, these appeals helped him repeatedly push back his execution date. Sometime later, Rolfe fully recovered from his injuries and renovated the house. He now enjoys spending time remembering his loved ones. Linnea and Trish got married and became mothers of many children. Long after that, Rolfe died of cancer surrounded by loved ones in 2008. The horrific case of the Teade family not only left an indelible mark of loss, but also shook the community to recognize the fragility of personal safety. Even in the most peaceful places, the story of Linnea and Trish Teade's resilience serves as a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Decades have passed since the case, but the lessons from this tragedy remain relevant, highlighting the importance of justice, compassion, and the ongoing efforts to protect communities from similar atrocities. Thank you for watching. If you liked my work, subscribe to the channel, support this video with a like, and let's discuss this story in the comments. Thank you all and goodbye. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Vashti Seacat. Brad Seacat was born on March 3, 1976, in Kingman, Kansas, to Janet Seacat and her husband, whose identity and background remain undisclosed due to a previous marriage. Janet had a son, Robert, from a prior marriage, making Robert Brad's older half-brother. The Seacat family has a history of good law enforcement, leading to a strict and disciplined home environment. Although details about Brad's childhood are scarce, it is known that he attended high school in Kingman. Brad was physically strong and athletic, which led him to participate in high school wrestling and bodybuilding. His efforts paid off as he excelled in inter-school tournaments, often taking first place and gaining recognition as a star wrestler and prominent figure in his school. At 16, Brad met Vashti Seacat at a major wrestling competition at the Kansas City Coliseum. Vashti was born on March 21, 1977, in Argonne, Seward County, to Julie Hostler and Clinton Forrest. She was the third of 4 children, with an older brother, Rich, and sister, Catherine, and a younger sister, Tyler. Vashti was a social person with many friends, but she struggled with feelings of inadequacy. However, this didn't hold her back from becoming a cheerleader for her school's wrestling team. She enjoyed watching the team win and attended every match, including the one where she met Brad. Brad was immediately smitten with Vashti and asked her out. Impressed by his confidence, she accepted, and they felt an instant connection at their first meeting. From that moment on, they were inseparable. After high school, Vashti attended a university, while he followed in his family's footsteps by enrolling in the police academy. As a result, they spent less time together, which caused Brad was starting to exhibit controlling and possessive behavior. Over time, Brad's growing jealousy became unbearable for Vashti, and she eventually ended the relationship. Although the breakup was not dramatic or traumatic, it marked the end of their romance. After graduating from the police academy, Brad joined the sheriff's department in Sedgwick County, a short distance from Kingman. Despite his professional accomplishments, he couldn't shake off the feeling of emptiness. He still had strong feelings for Vashti, and his love for her lingered deep within him. Brad didn't abandon his dream of reuniting with Vashti, and as soon as the chance presented itself, he visited her. His words struck a chord with Vashti, who sensed his sincerity, possibly due to his devotion to faith or genuine affection. This led her to decide to return to him. Overjoyed by her decision, Brad hastily approached Vashti's family to express his true intentions and request her hand in marriage. The Seacat family was thrilled to hear the news, convinced that their marriage would be a successful one. The wedding took place in 2004, after which Brad and Vashti settled in a neighborhood in Kingman. As they began building their new life, they befriended Monty Weldon, a friendly neighbor who frequently invited them to backyard barbecues. Brad's unpleasant behavior causing problems due to his controlling personality. However, when Vashti became pregnant, their issues appeared to fade away. In 2006, they welcomed their first son, Brandon, and 2 years later, their second son, Bronson. Although Brad was a loving father, he sometimes had a rough way of interacting with the children, especially during playtime. He treated the children like adults and occasionally showed a more aggressive side. Brad's behavior was concerning. He once beat a prisoner by hitting his head against a concrete wall, causing a fractured skull and brain damage. The prisoner later died from his injuries. Brad was sued for using excessive force, but his boss, Sheriff Gary Steve, supported him, and the charges were eventually dropped. The prosecutor's office and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation dismissed the complaint, clearing Brad of any wrongdoing. Brad showed no remorse for his actions and even admitted to his colleagues that he liked to use violence, especially against individuals he considered bad people. On a separate occasion, Brad and another officer restrained a defendant who became unruly and resisted being removed from the courtroom for contempt of the judge. This incident earned them recognition, and the police chief awarded both officers bronze medals for their actions. On the other hand, Vashti wants to pursue her career despite her love for her children. She searched for a job and succeeded with her efforts. She became the new human resources director at Vito Communications Company. However, Brad seemed unhappy about her new role. He wants Vashti to focus only on family work and her children's education. As a result, he started complaining about Vashti spending too much time at the office. The number of arguments between Vashti and Brad increased significantly. Despite her best efforts to repair their marriage for the sake of their children, Vashti feels her efforts are in vain. She had a feeling that their situation would eventually end in disaster. To resolve the conflict, Vashti and Brad began attending sessions with social worker Connie Sodman. During her first sessions, Vashti expressed feelings of extreme loneliness and isolation, suggesting that couples therapy sessions might be their last hope to save their marriage. Every time Vashti mentioned the possibility of divorce, Brad became angry. For weeks, he repeatedly threatened to kill her if she left him, boasting that he could take her life without consequences because he was a police officer. He claimed he could make her murder look like a suicide, and even mentioned burning down their house to destroy the evidence. After the argument, Brad threatened her, saying that if Vashti pursued a divorce, he would prevent her from seeing their children, even taking them out of the country if necessary. At the same time, Brad left his police job and began working as a self-defense instructor at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Meanwhile, Vashti continued to attend therapy sessions and made positive changes in her life, such as exercising regularly and eating healthier. A few months later, Vashti's social life began to flourish. She makes new connections at work and meets someone she is attracted to. However, she confided in her sister about her new relationship out of fear that Brad might find out and take revenge. Vashti openly shared with her colleagues about the various threats she received from her husband. Unbeknownst to her, Brad discovered her personal diary and brought it to his office, where he scanned and printed out many pages. He then spends his days researching topics including suicide, fire injuries, and the difference between murder and suicide. In the first week of April 2011, Vashti had her final counseling session with Connie to prepare for her divorce from Brad. Together, they created a safety plan for Vashti and their children. When Brad received his divorce papers on April 29th, he overreacted. After discovering the papers, Brad finds a projector in the pantry and uses it to enlarge a handwritten note from Vashti's diary. At the same time, he also wrote a farewell message to his children. What's amazing is that he also printed out documents on how to disguise a murder as a suicide. Additionally, Brad asked the maintenance staff how to properly destroy computer hard drives, and he used a blowtorch to destroy them because they contained images that were unfavorable to him. Then he threw the rest in the trash. Later that day, Brad bought gas at a convenience store and put it in his truck. That evening, he asked Vashti if he could spend the night at home to say goodbye to his children and promised to leave the next morning. However, he also tries to persuade Vashti to reconsider the divorce and becomes increasingly threatening when she refuses to change her mind. Vashti and Brad had a disagreement that evening which resulted in Vashti going to bed exhausted around 3:15 a.m. Meanwhile, Brad entered the bedroom with a gun and shot Vashti in the neck. A neighbor who was awake and watching TV thought she heard gunshots but felt it wasn't concerning enough. Brad then staged his suicide by placing the gun next to Vashti's body. He poured gasoline into the hallway and upstairs bedroom and took Vashti's phone to call himself, creating an alibi. After getting his children, Brendan and Bronson, to a safe location, Brad started a fire. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the main room and igniting the remaining cartridges in the gun. At 3:45 a.m., neighbors were startled awake by the fire. Shortly thereafter, at around 7 a.m., Brad called 911, reporting that his wife had taken her own life. When emergency responders arrived, the first floor of the house was on fire and Brad was waiting in the car with his children. A police officer asked if anyone was still in the house, and Brad said that only his wife was there. He fabricated a story that Vashti had shot herself out of depression, and before doing that, she asked him to take the children to a safe place. Brad claimed he tried to save Vashti but was unable to do so because of the intense smoke and fire. When firefighters finally extinguished the blaze, they discovered Vashti's body on the bed in the master bedroom. An important detail attracted the attention of investigators. A .44 caliber revolver was found below Vashti's body, the barrel pointed toward her feet, and a 5-gallon gasoline barrel lay middle of the bed. 2 days later, investigators found Vashti's diary in her car, which contained a handwritten note and a suicide note. Forensic examination revealed that Vashti died instantly from a gunshot wound to the head and also suffered gunshot wounds to the torso and thighs. However, blood and lung tests showed no signs of smoke or carbon monoxide inhalation, which is typically present in the body of a person killed in a fire. The extent of the burns on Vashti's body made it impossible to determine whether her death was a murder or suicide. Police discovered some inconsistencies in Brad's story. It is worth noting that there was no dirt, blood, or wound on his body. Additionally, the position of the gun with the barrel pointing downward raises suspicions that this was not a suicide. Special Agent David Fetty of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation questioned how the gun came to be under the body. He pointed out that if Vashti shot herself while lying down, the gun would fall to the floor. If she sat up, the gun would still be on the right side of the bed. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet does not support the theory that Vashti shot himself behind the right ear. David decides to investigate further when some details don't seem to add up. Police found documents explaining how to make a murder look like a suicide. While analyzing Vashti's diary entry, they noticed her handwriting did not match her other entries. Forensic scientist Dennis McFarr concluded that the note had been tampered with. Witnesses also reported seeing Brad destroy a computer hard drive the day before. A neighbor who heard the fatal gunshot testified that the incident occurred at 3:15 a.m., 45 minutes before Brad called 911. This information confirms David's suspicions that something is wrong. Police arrested Brad on May 13, 2011 and charged him with first-degree premeditated murder and 2 other counts related to putting his sons, Brendan and Bronson, in danger. During interrogation, Brad claimed that Vashti felt insecure and depressed because of their troubled marriage and his threats to take the children away. Brad also claimed that after filing for divorce, Vashti was overcome with depression and remorse, so she set a fire and shot herself. However, the police did not believe his story. The trial began on June 10, 2013. Deputy Attorney General Amy Haley shared her account of the events with the jury, emphasizing that no one was more aware than the police of the devastation of fire and its destructive ability to erase evidence. Regarding the projector, the defendant claimed that he only used this device for practical training to guide students. A forensic examiner testified about a forged letter and the destruction of a hard drive. The defendant claimed that he destroyed the hard drive to protect personal information, not to hide anything. The defendant's attorney, Roger Falk, argued that Vashti had suffered from depression since high school, a condition that had worsened after taking some kind of sedative. Brad's brother testified in court, corroborating his brother's account that Vashti had been depressed and sad for weeks before her death. In contrast, therapist Can reported that although Vashti was initially depressed due to marital circumstances, it was not a clinical mental health problem. The therapist said Vashti has been very worried about her future lately. Vashti's brother also recounting the emotional turmoil Vashti's children had endured as a result of their parents' circumstances. The prosecution portrayed Brad as a manipulative person who used his police powers to distort the truth. Yet the defense repeatedly argued that Vashti's death was a suicide and pointed out that even the medical examiner could not determine the cause of her death. Brad testified in his own defense, describing himself as a loving husband and devoted father who was saddened by his wife's desire for a divorce. Kingman County Judge Larry Solomon was accused by Brad that the judge had an incentive to rule against him to win a nomination to the Kansas Supreme Court. However, the jury ultimately found Brad guilty of premeditated murder. Judge Solomon sentenced Brad to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years and an additional 6 years for other crimes. Brad will not be eligible for parole until he has served more than 31 years. In handing down the sentence, the judge took into account Brad's not guilty plea, his dishonest attempt to avoid responsibility, and his lack of remorse. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bianca Roberson. Bianca Roberson, born on October 17, 1998, Bianca grew up to be a remarkable individual. She excelled at Bayard Rustin High School, earning straight A's and graduating with honors. Her impressive academic record earned her a 4-year merit scholarship to Jacksonville University in Florida, where she planned to major in criminal justice and pursue her dream of becoming an FBI forensic agent. Bianca was a multi-talented young woman who had been involved in various activities throughout her life. She was a Girl Scout, a cheerleader, and a basketball player. She also had a passion for music, taking lessons in flute, violin, clarinet, and guitar. Additionally, she was an artist. Bianca lived with her mother and maternal grandmother, Josephine Perry, and was excited to experience the independence and challenges of dorm life. However, her plans were tragically cut short. On June 28, 2017, Bianca, her mother, and grandmother went shopping at Walmart to prepare for her upcoming move to Florida. Bianca Roberson was tragically killed in a car accident on a road she knew well. The incident occurred just 10 minutes after she left a Walmart parking lot. Witnesses quickly called 911, and first responders rushed to the scene. Unfortunately, paramedics were unable to save Bianca, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. Initial observations suggested that Bianca's severe head injuries were caused by her car veering off the road. However, as police interviewed eyewitnesses, a crucial detail emerged. A witness reported that Bianca's car had collided with a red pickup truck, which had fled the scene without stopping. As she drove home to meet her granddaughter, Bianca's grandmother was worried about the traffic and wondered if it might be related to Bianca. However, she had no idea that the cause of the traffic jam was actually a car crash involving Bianca. When she arrived home, she was met with devastating news. 2 police officers were waiting to inform her that Bianca had been killed in the accident. For Michelle, Bianca's mother, the news was almost too much to bear. Losing a child is every parent's worst nightmare. Michelle, a nurse from Delaware County, was still grieving the loss of her 22-year-old son, ML James Rowley, who had passed away from a heart condition in 2013. She had hoped that time would ease her pain, but instead, it had only intensified with the loss of her daughter. Michelle Robertson is struggling to cope with the loss of her second child. "I'm just existing," she said, feeling lost and without purpose. Her children were her reason for getting up in the morning, and now she feels like a mom without kids. After her divorce from Rodney Robertson in 2006, they managed to put aside their differences and work together as amicable co-parents thanks to their daughter Bianca. Michelle acknowledged that their divorce was not easy, but Bianca's presence helped to calm the tension. "Bianca didn't like it when I spoke harshly to her mother, and she would correct me," he said. Bianca's love for her family, especially her father, brought them closer together. Rodney admitted that Bianca was his favorite, and her devotion to family was inspiring. Bianca's father proudly said that his daughter was one step closer to achieving her dream of becoming an FBI forensic specialist. Bianca was excited to be on her own, but her future career was her main focus. Her hard work had paid off, as she had received a 4-year merit scholarship to Jacksonville University, one of the 3 schools that had accepted her out of the 4 she had applied to. Bianca's father said she had also been accepted to Coastal Carolina and the University of Georgia. Investigators were seeking CCTV footage to confirm the initial belief that Bianca's car veered off the road after colliding with a red pickup truck. If this were the case, it would imply that Bianca's death was no accident, but rather a deliberate act that required the police to identify a perpetrator. However, the truth revealed during the investigation proved even more stunning. While awaiting the CCTV footage, a significant development in the case occurred. It was initially assumed that Bianca's death resulted from her car crashing and hitting her head. Yet, during the autopsy, forensic experts made a startling discovery: there was a bullet in Bianca's head. This revelation drastically altered the course of the investigation. What initially seemed like an accident and later a collision with a red pickup truck was revealed to be a death caused by a gunshot wound to the head. The autopsy report's findings prompted detectives to meet with Bianca's family, bringing devastating news that her death was no accident. This revelation sent shockwaves, especially for her mother, Michelle, who couldn't fathom why anyone would harm her daughter. Bianca had a close-knit relationship with those around her, and her family couldn't identify anyone who might have wished her harm. Desperate for answers, the Robertson family relied on investigators to identify the person responsible for Bianca's tragic death. Upon reviewing the security footage from the Walmart her family visited on the day of her death, detectives found no suspicious activity. The detectives closely examined the family's actions from the moment they left their cars to the time they departed the parking lot. They dismissed the possibility that someone from Walmart could have followed Bianca and shot her, as she had not argued with anyone during their visit. The family had simply shopped, loaded their purchases into Bianca's car, and left. The investigation suggested that the motive for Bianca's death might be linked to an incident that occurred while she was driving home on the highway. Bianca's mother recalled, "We packed all the bags into Bianca's car," referring to the 2009 Chevy Malibu they had purchased for her 16th birthday from CarMax. Michelle recalled that her mother had chosen the car Bianca was driving when she first got her permit. According to Michelle, Bianca's mother said that Bianca had gotten everything she wanted, but Michelle didn't think of her as spoiled. Instead, she believed Bianca was simply loved and also willing to work for the things she desired. In fact, Bianca started her first job at McDonald's when she was 15 and soon switched to a dietary aide position at the Whitehorse Village Retirement Community in Delaware County. Michelle remembered that she had received a large number of letters and cards from the residents at Whitehorse Village who adored Bianca. After the police obtained traffic footage from CCTV cameras, Michelle pointed out that there were no cameras at the exact location where Bianca veered off the road. However, there was a camera about a mile away. To help illustrate the location, Michelle suggested looking at Google Maps. According to the map, Bianca lost control of her car where two lanes merged into one. When investigators reviewed the recording, they found evidence that supported the account of Bianca's encounter with the driver of the red pickup truck. The footage showed the cars traveling side by side, approaching a point where their lanes merged into one. It's possible that the conflict began when one driver failed to yield to the other. Given the tragic outcome, investigators inferred that the driver of the red pickup truck might have been the one who fired the shot. However, the poor quality of the footage made it impossible to read the pickup truck's license plates or see the driver's face. Nevertheless, from that point on, the driver of the pickup truck became the primary suspect in Bianca Roberson's death. Detectives were tasked with identifying the man, but they only had a blurry image to work with. After inquiring with Bianca's family members, it became clear that none of them knew anyone who owned a red pickup truck. The police then re-interviewed the witnesses who were present at the scene and those who had called 911, but unfortunately, none of them had caught a glimpse of the vehicle's license plate. The Bianca Roberson family has received an outpouring of support from friends, strangers, and people of all ages since Bianca's passing. A vigil was held just 2 days after her death, and many have reached out to share their stories and condolences. Bianca's family describes her as a selfless and compassionate person who always put the needs of others before her own. According to her mother, Michelle, Bianca would often take in children who were in need, even if it meant sneaking them into their home without permission. When confronted about her actions, Bianca would simply say that she wanted to help others in the same way she would want someone to help her if she were in a similar situation. This kind of empathy and kindness was evident in many aspects of Bianca's life, including the time she witnessed a car accident and immediately asked her mother if they could stop to help. A kind-hearted woman's first instinct was to invite those eating alone to join her family for dinner. In the aftermath of Bianca's car accident, investigators analyzed footage from distant cameras to determine the direction of the red pickup truck involved in the incident. To gather more details about the truck, including its brand, model, and license plate, they required higher quality footage. The police sought the public's assistance through the media, asking anyone with information about the truck to come forward. Following the accident, the pickup truck turned towards Poi Pike. To find evidence, detectives visited nearby houses and shops, searching for cameras that might have captured the truck. After an extensive search, they found a camera with good quality footage, taken around 5 minutes after witnesses called 911 to report Bianca's car accident. Upon analyzing this footage, detectives saw the red pickup truck driving by shortly after the incident. The investigation continued, but the license plate of the suspect's car remained unknown, and it was unclear if the car in the footage was the same one or just a similar vehicle. However, 2 days after the incident, a new lead emerged when a woman contacted the police, claiming to have seen the car they were searching for. She also reported seeing the driver's face. She described the car as a red pickup truck that overtook her, stopped at the Poi Pike intersection, and then turned left. This information was crucial in narrowing down the search area and also revealed that the pickup truck in the footage was not the actual suspect's vehicle, but rather a similar-looking truck. Her description helped a forensic artist create a sketch of the suspect, who was identified as a white male, 25 to 35 years old, with brown hair and a stubble beard. The police released the suspect's sketch, hoping someone would recognize the person and come forward. They showed the sketch to Bianca's family, but no one recognized the individual. As the investigation continued, detectives began to consider the possibility that Bianca's death was a hate crime. To gather more evidence, the police canvassed the area where the red pickup truck was last seen, visiting homes and businesses near the intersection where it turned left. They were searching for a high-quality surveillance recording that could provide answers to their questions. Their efforts paid off when a homeowner, who lived less than half a mile from the intersection, provided the police with a recording from their driveway surveillance camera. By estimating the time it would take to drive from the crime scene to the homeowner's location, the police quickly found the relevant footage. Although the new footage was of better quality than the previous one, its angle made it impossible for the police to identify the car or its driver. The police worked hard to find another recording from a closer camera, and they got lucky. Although the license plate was not visible, they were able to identify some unique features of the car. These features included a sticker on the right side window, a vertical dent on the passenger door, and damage to the hood. With these details, the police had a much better chance of finding the car. The police sought the public's help in finding the truck and its driver by offering a $5,000 reward for any information that could aid in the investigation. They were confident that someone would recognize the distinctive vehicle. 3 days after Bianca Roberson's death, a lawyer contacted the police station on behalf of a client who wanted to turn himself in, stating that his client was connected to the incident that resulted in Bianca's death. The incident occurred on a recent Wednesday at approximately 5:30 p.m. Bianca Roberson, an 18-year-old who had just graduated from Westchester Ruston High School, was driving on Route 100, a two-lane highway, on her way to Jacksonville University. Her life was full of promise, with a loving family and a bright future ahead. As she approached the merge with Route 202, the road narrowed from 2 lanes to 1. A common merge on a southeastern Pennsylvania highway turned deadly last Wednesday when a dispute over positioning escalated into violence. Bianca Roberson was merging from 2 lanes to 1 when a man in a red pickup truck, also merging, became agitated and shot her in the head. The suspect, 28-year-old David Desper of Pennsylvania, surrendered to police with his lawyer. Although he refused to testify, he consented to a search of his home and revealed the location of his pickup truck. David was subsequently arrested and charged with Bianca Roberson's murder. The police tracked down the suspect's vehicle, a pickup truck, at a location David had previously mentioned. Unique features on the truck, such as stickers on the windows and damage to the body, made it unmistakably clear that it was the same truck involved in the crime. The investigators searched David's residence and found the firearm that was used to shoot and kill Bianca Roberson. Despite this major breakthrough in the case, the authorities remained baffled as to the killer's motivation. Over 800 loved ones and members of the community attended a heart-wrenching farewell ceremony at the St. Paul's Baptist Church in the suburban Westchester borough, which lies approximately 25 miles. During the funeral service, many people paid tribute to she, including her brothers, officials from her high school, the chief admissions officer from the university she was set to attend, and friends. In his eulogy, Pastor Wayne Croft Sr. drew a comparison between the shooter and 2 other infamous cases: George Zimmerman, who shot and killed Trayvon Martin, a black teenager, in Florida in 2012, and was acquitted of murder in 2013, and Michael Dunn, who shot and killed Jordan Davis, another black teenager, in Florida in 2012, after a dispute over music. Dunn was convicted and sentenced to life in prison plus 90 years. The pastor expressed the sentiment of the black community, stating that regardless of whether Bianca's murder was a result of road rage or racism, the fact remains that a brilliant young black woman's life was lost. During the trial in September 2018, David Desper was asked to explain his motive for committing the crime. Instead of providing an answer, he requested forgiveness from Bianca's family. For Bianca's parents, the thought of facing their daughter's alleged killer was daunting. To show their support and unity, Rodney had arranged for family members and friends to wear T-shirts with Bianca's face on the front as they gathered at the Chester County Government Services Center. The family of Bianca Roberson wore bracelets with a poignant message: Bianca Roberson, a rose in God's garden. They also held a banner that read, "Justice for Bianca Nicole Roberson," a reminder of the tragic event that took her life on June 28, 2017. Rodney, Bianca's father, expressed his uncertainty about how he would react when he saw the man responsible for his daughter's murder. "I don't know what I'll do when I see him," he said. The man who held the gun that took my daughter's life, he just took her dreams away. He had no right to do that. Michelle, Bianca's mother, struggled to come to terms with the loss of her child. I want to hold her, comfort her, and bring her back, she said through tears. The prosecutor argued that the traffic conflict occurred because Bianca failed to yield when their lanes merged into one. In response, David Desper rolled down the passenger side window and fired a shot. Realizing the severity of his actions, David Desper fled the scene, leaving his pickup truck with a friend in Pennsylvania, and attempted to escape to Delaware. However, after his sketch and the distinctive features of his pickup truck were publicized in the news, David Desper decided to hire a lawyer and surrender. The police investigated his social media accounts and interviewed his friends but found no evidence to suggest that the crime was motivated by bias. As a result, David Desper was not charged with a hate crime. District Attorney Hogan stated that there was no indication that the crime was racially motivated or a hate crime. However, many people disagreed with this assessment. Before the sentencing, the defense portrayed David Desper as harmless and immature for his age, describing him as a big kid who enjoyed playing with cars in his free time. They argued that David Desper had essentially handed the case to the government by turning himself in. The defense claimed that David Desper was driving home when another car startled him, causing him to fire the gun. They maintained that David Desper was not a menacing individual. Prosecutor Chris Miller countered that a 28-year-old man driving with a loaded firearm is not a big kid. He emphasized that David Desper's actions were those of a responsible adult. Ironically, David Desper's own mother had shared a Facebook post about the police searching for the person who murdered Bianca Roberson, unaware that the suspect was her own son. Wendy Desper expressed her love for Bianca's family and apologized for her son's actions. "I'm so sorry for what my son did," she said, as her son wept. Rodney Robertson struggled to speak through tears as he addressed his daughter's killer. "I have simple questions for the defendant," he said. "Why did you shoot my daughter? Was it because of her youth, her race, her gender, or just because you wanted to go first on the road? Was it simply because you were having a bad day?" Rodney continued, "All my dreams for Bianca were coming true until the day the defendant took her life. Now, all I have left of Bianca are my memories." David Desper pleaded guilty to third-degree murder. The court sentenced him to 40 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Judge Anne-Marie Wheatcraft became emotional as she announced the sentence, telling Desper, "I don't believe you were afraid, I believe it was anger." County Judge Anne-Marie Wheatcraft imposed the maximum sentence of 20 to 40 years for that grade of homicide. David Desper attempted to appeal the sentence, but his appeal was denied. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Rowan Ford. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, her mom met a man named David, and they got married. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their wedding, she and David had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent a lot of time outdoors, riding her bike around town, enjoying swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also liked going to Sunday school at the local church, where she always volunteered to help other kids who had some issues with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old, she was in the 4th grade at the local elementary school. Her mom worked the night shift at a store, while her stepdad spent most of the day on the farm. which made Rowan often fend for herself, making her very independent. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mom went to work, and her stepdad hadn't returned from the farm yet. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Colleen came home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter wasn't there. She asked her husband where her daughter was, and he said she had asked him if she could have a sleepover at a friend's house, and he had let her go. He didn't even ask the friend's name because their town was very small, and he wasn't worried about anything happening to her. But Colleen started to worry and decided to check with all of Rowan's friends. Since there were only a few streets in their town, it didn't take long, but none of them had seen her, and she hadn't stayed over at any of their houses, which made her mother even more concerned. Colleen searched the whole town but couldn't find her daughter. She went back home and told her husband that Rowan was nowhere to be found. She asked him to call the police and report her missing, but he reassured her that everything was fine and that she would come home soon. After waiting for several more hours with no sign of Rowan, Colleen took matters into her own hands and dialed 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to their house to speak with David, and as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared, David said that on that evening, while he was working on the farm with his colleague Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan came by. They all decided to go to David's place to have some drinks and play pool. They stopped by the store, bought some alcohol, and went to David's house, where they spent several hours. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town, where his trailer was. They persuaded David to join them to continue the fun. Before leaving the house, he checked on Rowan in her room, seeing that she was asleep. David left with his friends, and they stopped by the store again to grab more alcohol and headed to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and asked Nathan to give him a ride. Nathan agreed but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway. By that time Nathan was quite drunk and didn't want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped David off and drove home. David went straight to bed. Soon after, he was awakened by Rowan, who asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and fell back asleep. Police approached this story with some skepticism. What puzzled them most was the fact that a 9-year-old girl decided to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather let her go without even asking which friend she was talking about. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search, as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. The population of Stella was only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread throughout the county. People were used to being able to let their children play outside without a worry, as nothing ever happened in such a quiet place. But now that Rowan vanished without a trace, and the police were unable to find her for a whole day, the residents of Stella were in a state of panic. The search for Rowan yielded no results on the first day. However, the investigation progressed on November 4th when the police spoke with Christopher in a neighboring town. He corroborated David's account, but revealed that David had not contacted him to inform him of Rowan's disappearance. Christopher stated he had not spoken with Rowan or her friends since that evening. Despite an expanded search with more volunteers, the police failed to find Rowan or any clues about her disappearance. The following day, the FBI joined the investigation while the local police continued searching the town and surrounding areas. As a result of growing skepticism towards David's account, detectives started focusing on a potential abduction. They spoke with all of Rowan's friends and verified that none of them had seen her on the night she went missing. As investigators questioned David, his account raised even more suspicions. David's details were inconsistent and contradictory, He altered the timeline of his whereabouts that night on multiple occasions. Additionally, David speculates that it is possible that Rowan left without his permission, which makes his story even more suspicious. During their investigation, FBI agents found out that David had borrowed his mother's car on the night of Rowan's disappearance, a detail he initially left out when questioned by the police. This new information led the authorities to seize both his mother's car and his own pickup truck for forensic examination. But unfortunately, no evidence was discovered. As part of the investigation, detectives wanted to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, since both had been with David that evening. Christopher was invited to the police station for further questioning, where he recounted the same story as before. He also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of dishonesty. After leaving the police station and returning to work, Christopher noticed Sheriff Clark's car and signaled for him to stop. As the sheriff of Whitton, where Christopher lived, Clark had known him since childhood. Sheriff Clark was close friends with Christopher's foster parents and was someone Christopher had always looked up to and sought advice from in times of need. Sheriff Clark met with Christopher to discuss Rowan's disappearance. Although familiar with the case, Clark hadn't been directly involved since the investigation was led by the Stella Department. During their conversation, Clark noticed that Christopher was acting strangely, which led him to suspect that Christopher might be hiding something. Given the gravity of the situation and Rowan's uncertain fate, Clark shared his concerns with the FBI. His call prompted investigators to consider the possibility that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that could link Rowan's stepfather to her disappearance. They wondered if Christopher's actions were directed by Rowan's stepfather to lie, and whether Christopher feared being seen as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark told the FBI agents that he had a close relationship with Christopher and offered to help persuade him to cooperate. That evening, Christopher visited Colleen's house to ask about the search progress. FBI agents also arrived to speak with Colleen again and saw Christopher there. They asked him questions, and he repeated his previous account. However, Christopher then mentioned for the first time that he didn't rule out David's possible involvement in Rowan's disappearance. He expressed his willingness to help uncover the truth, even if it was terrible, and suggested wearing a wire to talk to David and try to get him to confess. The detectives decided against this approach. Instead, they asked Christopher to suggest locations where David might have hidden Rowan's body. Christopher provided several locations, which the police searched the next morning. Meanwhile, FBI agents questioned David again, but he continued to deny any involvement. Detectives searched Christopher's home for leads, but the search yielded no results. Meanwhile, Christopher visited the sheriff's office to discuss his encounter with the FBI with Clark. During their conversation, the sheriff sensed that Christopher was holding back information. After their meeting, Clark reached out to the detectives again, suggesting that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that helped prove David's involvement in the case. The FBI agents asked the sheriff to persuade Christopher to open up, as he had been in regular contact with Clark to discuss the case. It seemed that Christopher wanted to share important details but was hesitant to do so for unknown reasons. The following day, November 7th, the police asked Christopher to return to the station. They requested his permission to search a safe located in David's house, where Christopher had been living temporarily and still had some belongings. Christopher agreed to the search and also allowed the police to search his trailer and car. Additionally, Christopher voluntarily provided a DNA sample and agreed to answer the detectives' questions again. During the questioning, he was asked to confirm David's story, but this time, Christopher revealed that his friend's account was not entirely accurate. The investigators then pressed him to disclose what really happened that evening. Christopher became agitated when the police treated him like a suspect in Rowan's disappearance. He refused to continue the conversation and left the station after warning the detectives that he might hire a lawyer. Later that evening, Christopher met with Sheriff Clark to express his concerns about the detective's behavior. Clark acknowledged Christopher's right to remain silent but explained that the police were doing everything possible to find Rowan. Christopher stated that he would no longer cooperate with the detectives and would only speak with Clark if he had any further information to share. Clark continued to encourage Christopher to open up, and eventually, Christopher broke down in tears, claiming that he loved Rowan and would never harm her. During his time living with the David family, Christopher formed a close bond with Rowan and the other children. They grew to treat him like one of their own, even affectionately referring to him as Uncle Christopher. Sheriff Clark realized that Christopher was on the verge of revealing crucial information, but just as he was about to open up, a visitor arrived at the police station, briefly distracting Clark and causing Christopher to leave. Sheriff Clark reached out to the FBI, updating them on his conversation with Christopher. Clark explained that Christopher was almost ready to disclose what he knew, but warned that pressuring him too hard could lead to him becoming defensive and seeking the help of a lawyer. Clark recommended giving Christopher time to reflect, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the following day but yielded no results. However, a new clue came on November 9th, exactly 1 week after her disappearance. Search teams converged on a remote area near the town of Powell, about 10 miles from Stella, and made a significant discovery in the fields and woods, a large pit in the ground. When authorities searched the area, they found Rowan's body hidden under leaves and debris. She was not wearing any clothing from the waist down except for a pair of stockings. A medical examination revealed signs of strangulation and evidence of a sexual assault. After the discovery, FBI agents reached out to Sheriff Clark, asking him to speak with Christopher again, hoping Christopher would now be more forthcoming. Sheriff Clark learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station, looking for him, and told other officers that he needed to speak with Clark urgently. Sheriff Clark then began searching for Christopher, checking all his usual locations, but he was nowhere to be found. This continued until Christopher contacted Sheriff Clark himself, sounding distressed and asking if he was being followed. Christopher explained that after hearing about Rowan's body, he had driven around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car following him. Sheriff Clark assures Christopher that he knows nothing about the surveillance and suggests they meet in person. When they met, Christopher appeared nervous and expressed concerns for his safety. He feared that with Rowan's body found, he might be accused of murder and that someone might seek revenge against him. Clark took Christopher to the police station, and he said that now when the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time for Christopher to reveal everything he knew. However, when Clark asked Christopher to share what David had done to Rowan, Christopher became emotional and hesitant to talk at the station. He explained that there were too many people around and suggested they move to a quieter location. Clark agreed, and they drove to a small bridge a few miles outside of town. Once they arrived, Christopher asked Clark to handcuff him. Clark was surprised but tried to reassure Christopher that it wasn't necessary. Christopher insists that what he is about to say will change everything and that Clark will then have to arrest him. Christopher then began recounting the events of that night. He told Clark that he, Nathan, and David had gone to his trailer to continue drinking. Later, his friends decided it was time to head home. Nathan gave David a ride, and they chose to take back roads to avoid the police. Christopher had shocked Clark that he had intended to sexually assault Rowan. To carry out his plan, Christopher took advantage of the time when his friends were busy taking a detour through the field. He drove straight to David's house via the main highway. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into Rowan's room, picked her up, and quietly transported her to his vehicle, carefully avoiding detection as she slept. When they reached his trailer, he sexually assaulted Rowan. This was interrupted when Rowan regained consciousness and tried her best to free herself, but to no avail. During the crime, Christopher took precautions to avoid recognition, deliberately choosing to keep the lights off and maintain his silence. He originally planned to return Rowan to her home under the guise of innocence, but under the illumination of a bright moon, Rowan finally laid eyes on Christopher as he transported her from the trailer. He grabbed a rope, resorted to force to resolve his predicament, and took Rowan's life with his bare hands. He frantically thought of ways to cover up his crime. He got in his car and began driving around the county, pondering methods of disposing of the body. He then remembered a large pit near a neighboring town and headed in that direction. When he arrived, he dumped Rowan's body in the hole and attempted to cover it with tree branches. Returning to the trailer, Christopher discovered traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. He also realized he needed to dispose of her pants, underwear, and the rope used to kill her. He gathered these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. However, he quickly reconsidered, realizing that a large fire would likely attract unwanted attention. Instead, Christopher dragged the barrel into a shed, closed the door, and started the fire inside. This revelation shocked Clark, who had previously suspected David of committing the crime and believed Christopher was withholding information. It was difficult for Clark to accept that a man he had known for nearly 20 years, a man with 3 young children of his own, was capable of such brutality. Although Christopher appears to be a good-natured man, his true nature is much more worrying. After finishing his story, Christopher willingly went to the police station with Clark. Once there, Christopher repeated his confession to the FBI agents and was subsequently arrested for murder. He also gave the authorities permission to search his trailer and car. As he concluded his confession, Christopher expressed regret over his actions and stated that he had cried uncontrollably the following day. The detectives then informed David about Christopher's confession. Given David's suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected he might be covering for his friend. However, during interrogation, David revealed a shocking new testimony. David claimed that when he found Rowan missing from her room, he suspected Christopher might have taken her. He took his mother's car and drove to Christopher's trailer. He found Rowan lying on the bed. Christopher leaned towards her. Instead of rescuing Rowan, David joined in and also sexually assaulted her. He then helped Christopher kill her and dispose of her body. David reported that during that traumatic incident, his brain went into shock, and he had no memory of the night for several days. The detectives, surprised by this new information, re-questioned Christopher to verify David's claim. However, Christopher maintained that David was not involved and that incident unfolded as he had initially described. The inconsistencies puzzled the detectives, but Christopher's account still matched incident that had occurred. Medical examination revealed that the victim was strangled with a thin rope, a detail that only the killer would be aware of. A search of the trailer led to the discovery of a barrel containing ashes, and hair similar to Rowan's was found in Christopher's car. Although investigators were still uncertain about the truthfulness of each man's account, both David and Christopher made incriminating statements. As a result, David was also arrested, and the case was sent to court for further proceedings. During the trial, Christopher requested that his statements be excluded from the case, arguing that he was not aware they could be used against him and that the police had violated his rights. However, the judge rejected this request, as all of Christopher's conversations with investigators were voluntary. Christopher also attempted to present mitigating circumstances, citing his difficult childhood as a factor. He had been shuffled between biological and foster parents from a young age, which had a significant impact on him. Despite these efforts, Christopher was unable to avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, Christopher was sentenced to death. He appealed the sentence, but was unsuccessful. In contrast, David's situation was more complex. Although he admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan, his account conflicted with Christopher's statements, creating a significant problem. If the prosecution had charged David with murder, it could have potentially led to Christopher's conviction being overturned, allowing David to avoid accountability as well. However, due to the lack of concrete evidence, such as DNA, in fact, they were still uncertain about David's involvement. Although it was possible that David might have collaborated with Christopher in committing the crime, there was no supporting evidence for this theory. To minimize the risk of overturning Christopher's sentence, the prosecution made the difficult decision to reduce David's charges. As a result, David pleaded guilty to 2 lesser charges: child endangerment and obstruction of justice. David received an 11 years prison sentence, with a minimum of 5 years to be served. This outcome sparked widespread outrage, as many felt that if David was indeed involved in the murder, his punishment was disproportionately lenient. Unfortunately, this sentence is now final, and it is unlikely that David will face retrial for this case. Christopher remains in prison awaiting execution, but it's uncertain whether the death penalty will be carried out due to the often lengthy time between sentencing and execution, which can span decades, meaning he might spend the rest of his life in prison instead. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Alison Baden-Clay. Alison Baden-Clay was born on July 1, 1968 in a suburb of Brisbane. She grew up in a wealthy family and developed a love for ballet from an early age. After completing her schooling, she pursued further studies and proved herself to be an excellent student, fluent in 6 languages. In 1993, at the age of 25, Alison entered a local beauty pageant, where she impressed the audience with her ballet skills. She then began her professional career in the Human Resources Department at the Brisbane Flight Centre. Here, her career progressed rapidly after her talent was recognized by her boss. It was while working at the center that she met her future husband, Gerard. Gerard Baden-Clay was born on September 9, 1970 in Bournemouth, United Kingdom. Gerard comes from a distinguished lineage, with his great-grandfather, Robert Baden-Powell, a prominent British military leader and founder of the Scouting movement. Gerard moved to Zambia with his family when he was 1 year old, as it was the homeland of his father, Nigel Clay. They remained in Zambia for 8 years before migrating to Australia. Gerard then completed his studies in Australia, graduating with a degree in accounting. He eventually joined the Brisbane Flight Centre, where he met Alison. Gerard met Alison at the Brisbane Flight Centre, marking the beginning of their romance. They married on August 23, 1997, and then went on a trip around the world, visiting several countries including South America and Switzerland, with a temporary stay in London. When they returned to Australia, Alison returned to work at the Flight Centre, eventually being promoted to a management position. In 2002, Alison became pregnant and gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Hannah. After Hannah was born, Alison decided to focus solely on raising her children and taking care of her family. Gerard made several career changes during this time and opened a luxury real estate company in Brisbane in 2004. With the help of his parents, he invested a lot of time and effort into the business. The Gerard family had a second daughter, Sarah, born in 2004, followed by their youngest child, Ella, born in 2006. The family lived in a rented house in Brookfield, a suburb of Brisbane. Meanwhile, Alison spent most of her time looking after the girls at home. Over time, Alison began to notice that Gerard was increasingly distant from her. This eventually led to a shocking confession that he no longer loved her. Gerard's behavior towards Alison changed dramatically. He constantly criticized her, complaining about the meals she cooked and the cleanliness of the house. He called her lazy and said she was no longer attractive to him. Allison chose to remain silent in the face of these hurtful comments. In her diary, she poured out her heart, expressing her enduring love for Gerard, their frequent arguments, her feelings of guilt and her determination to change to win his love back. Allison hid her family troubles behind a cheerful exterior, making her appear to be a warm, caring person, a devoted mother and a loving wife. However, her family life took a difficult turn in 2011. Gerard's business suffered after the Queensland floods, resulting in a significant debt of around $1 million Australian dollars. That same year, in October, Allison discovered that Gerard was secretly having an affair with Tony McHugh, a co-worker. Gerard and Tony met in 2008 when Tony was a client, and Gerard hired her. At the time, Tony was having marital problems after 17 years of marriage, which eventually led to Tony's divorce. Tony knew Gerard was married, but Gerard said that the relationship with Allison was loveless and that he was only staying for their daughter. Gerard promised Tony a future together, and that he would marry her. In October 2011, Allison discovered that Gerard was having an affair with Tony. Gerard immediately ended the relationship and severed ties with Tony by firing her from his real estate company and reconciled with Allison. Tony still harbored hopes for a future with Gerard. 4 months later, in April 2012, Tony and Gerard were talking on the phone while Tony was driving home. They discussed an upcoming real estate conference and Gerard casually mentioned that Tony would be meeting Allison there the next day. This revelation upset Tony, causing her to question the promises he had made to her and to call him dishonest. Gerard apologized to Tony, reaffirmed his love for her, and reiterated his commitment to ending his marriage to Allison within 3 months. The following morning, April 20th, at 7:14 a.m., Gerard contacted the police in a distressed state, reporting that Allison had gone missing after going for a walk around 10 p.m. the night before. When police arrived at Gerard's home, they noticed deep, curved scratches on his face, which he claimed he had sustained while shaving. Further examination revealed small red marks on his chest, which Gerard explained were from a moth bite he had encountered while changing an outdoor light. A search of the house revealed no signs of a disturbance. Everything was in order, and the bed was made. Despite his stress, Gerard appeared calm and began getting his daughters ready for school and daycare. Police interviewed Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, who reported falling asleep after their mother turned off the lights and had not seen her since. During questioning, the crying girls described their parents as a happy and generally harmonious couple. Police searched the area and spoke to neighbors, but no one witnessed anything unusual. The only initial clues found were a small bloodstain on Allison's car and a strand of her hair in the trunk. A large-scale search operation soon followed, with rescue teams and volunteers searching woods, wells, manholes, and dams near the Allison family home. To aid the search efforts, a mannequin was placed wearing an outfit similar to Allison's last known outfit to aid the search efforts. As time went on, the chances of finding Allison alive diminished. Her friends clung to hope, not wanting to think the worst. Gerard appeared visibly upset as he tearfully pleaded with his wife to return, in front of the media. Behind the scenes, however, he instructed his lover, Tony, to keep quiet and put their relationship on hold, promising to reunite in the future. 10 days after Allison went missing, a boater made a horrifying discovery on the banks of Colorado Creek, about 8 miles from the Allison family home, on April 30, 2012. The body was found in an advanced state of decomposition. The day after Allison's body was discovered, Gerard contacted his insurance company to inquire about filing an $800,000 life insurance claim on his wife. A medical examiner later formally identified the body as Allison Baden-Clay, 43, using dental records. Notably, Allison was still wearing the same clothes she had been wearing when she went missing. A post-mortem examination found that Allison's death was likely due to strangulation. Her death was therefore classified as a homicide, although determining the exact cause was difficult due to the advanced stage of decomposition of the body. On May 11, 2012, St. Paul's Cathedral in Brisbane held a funeral for Alison Baden-Clay, who had tragically passed away. Her husband, Gerard, was visibly overcome with emotion, crying throughout the service as he consoled his daughters and consoled Alison's parents. Hundreds of people attended the service. However, while Gerard was apparently mourning his wife's death, he was secretly communicating with his mistress, Toni, through public phone calls. He informed her of Alison's passing and urged her to keep their affair a secret from the police investigation. Meanwhile, the police began to question the story Gerard had given them. He claimed that Alison had gone for a walk around 10 p.m. and was gone when he woke up. However, conflicting evidence emerged. Police found that Gerard had charged his phone at 2 a.m. and was on his computer at 5 a.m., and forensic analysis showed that the marks on his cheeks were consistent with fingernail scratches. In addition, no blood was found on his razor. A biologist disputed Gerard's explanation of the caterpillar bites on his chest, stating that no caterpillars in the family's area could have caused such injuries. A separate expert examined Alison's hair and found 5 different types of leaves: eucalyptus, Chinese elm, myrtle, cat's claw vine, and herringbone fern. 2 of these, eucalyptus and Chinese elm, were found growing directly under the bridge where Alison's body was discovered. In addition, all 5 types of leaves and thorns were found in the Alison family's backyard. On June 13, 2012, a month after Alison's funeral, 41-year-old Gerard Baden-Clay was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. He maintained his innocence and claimed he would fight the charges and applied for bail, which was immediately denied due to concerns that he might flee. During the investigation, police spoke to Toni, who revealed their 4-year secret relationship to Gerard. It was also discovered that just days before Alison went missing, Gerard had sent Toni a letter promising to be with Toni on July 1st. Further complicating the case. The prosecution's theory was that Gerard had killed his wife, Alison, to collect life insurance money and pay off debts. They believed he also planned to move on with Toni McHugh. According to their theory, a fight broke out on the evening of April 19, 2012, while Gerard and Alison were watching TV after their daughters had gone to bed. During the argument, Alison allegedly scratched Gerard's cheek, leaving her fingernails to collect DNA evidence. Unfortunately, the DNA had degraded, making it impossible to determine its source. The prosecution claimed that Gerard strangled Alison, then dragged her body through the backyard, leaving her hair tangled with leaves. Gerard placed her body in the trunk of his car and drove to a nearby river, where he dumped her body under a bridge. The prosecution believed that Gerard thought the river would wash her body away, effectively covering up his crime. Gerard then allegedly returned home, charged his phone, cleaned the house, and reported Alison missing the next morning. After finding Alison's body, Gerard hired a criminal defense attorney and went to see him. During Gerard's 2014 murder trial for Alison, prosecutors were convinced that Gerard was guilty and argued that he had killed her. However, Gerard maintained that he had nothing to do with her death. He admitted that he and Alison had argued and suggested that she may have left the house late one night because she was depressed and may have taken her own life. However, Alison's family and friends rejected this idea. They were certain that Alison would never leave her daughters, as she loved them very much. Her friends had long spoken out against Gerard, describing him as arrogant, fake, and self-centered. They believed that Alison's deep love for him blinded her to these negative traits. During the trial, excerpts from Alison's diary were presented as evidence. The diary revealed how isolated she felt and how controlling Gerard was, especially after the birth of their first child. She described feeling trapped at home and detailed several instances of Gerard's controlling behavior. This included insulting her, monitoring her conversations with a baby monitor, controlling her finances, deleting relatives' contact details from her phone and blocking their calls. After Allison's death, Gerard's attempts to make an insurance claim were rejected, with the money being withheld until the trial was over. Another important testimony came from Melissa Romano, who had never met Gerard in person but had spoken to him on the phone in 2009 about a real estate deal. She testified that after the deal was finalized, Gerard called her out of the blue, suggesting, "I'm looking for someone to kill my wife." Melissa, stunned, questioned his motives, but Gerard abruptly redirected the conversation and ended the call. This testimony played a key role in the case against Gerard, which on July 15, 2014, Gerard Badenclay was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 15 years. In 2015, Gerard appealed his conviction, and the court reclassified the crime to involuntary manslaughter, shortening his prison term. However, the decision sparked widespread outrage, with around 4,000 people demonstrating in support of Allison's family. In response to public sentiment, in 2016, Australia's High Court overturned the Court of Appeal's decision, reinstating the original murder conviction. As a result, Gerard will not be eligible for parole until at least 2027. During his incarceration, Gerard initially behaved like a model prisoner. However, over time, he adapted to prison life and became less restrained in his behavior, leading to an incident where he clashed with a prison guard, which resulted in a stern reprimand. Following Gerard Badenclay's trial, his former lover, Tony McHugh, moved to Bali, where she spent her time teaching and doing charity work. 4 years later, she moved to the United Arab Emirates to continue her education career. Tony now lives a private life, keeping her personal information private. She occasionally connects with friends on social media using a private account, as she fears that Gerard may try to find her after his release. In a recent public statement, Tony expressed remorse for her actions and clarified that she never intended to cause Allison any harm. Allison's daughters Hannah, Sarah and Ella Badenclay are living with her parents. Allison's assets, including her insurance money, have been passed on to her children. After completing her university studies in 2022, Hannah has followed in her mother's footsteps by pursuing a career in dance. In memory of her sister Allison, Vanessa set up a charity to combat domestic violence and support those affected, while raising awareness of the issue. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Rachel McLean. Rachel McLean returned home to Blackpool, UK, for the summer of 1990. She was 18 years old and had just finished her first year at Oxford. Rachel was very busy with her studies and spent all her free time studying. She had a healthy lifestyle and played sports. Rachel had many friends and loved heavy metal music. She joined a local charity, where she worked during the summer. While on a day off, Rachel was relaxing with friends at a local club when she met a bartender named John Turner, who had long brown hair. John was from Nottingham and had returned to Blackpool for the summer. Rachel found him attractive and easy to talk to, so they quickly became interested in each other. That night, they chatted. John attended Rachel's 19th birthday party. After the party, they had a passionate night together. According to John, their relationship continued to develop. However, at the end of the summer, Rachel had to return to Oxford, and John returned to Nottingham. The two cities were just over 2 hours' drive apart, so they could easily visit each other. They spent weekends together and kept in touch by letter and phone during the week. John wrote Rachel long love letters, which she enjoyed. John Turner was born in HMP, but as a child he moved to New Zealand with his parents and settled in a city called Bath. The family lived in two countries before John returned to the UK to study at King's College. During his time there, he won the hearts of both students and teachers. He hosted a show on the local college radio station twice a week and was a talented athlete on the soccer team. Rachel McLean was a promising student. Her literature teacher at college admired her achievements. Rachel started college in the same year as John. On Christmas, Rachel invited John to meet her parents and they had a nice evening together. Rachel's parents were very happy with her choice, finding John intelligent, good-looking and confident. John became increasingly infatuated with Rachel but was saddened by the distance between them. During this time, she moved into a student apartment on the first floor of the school with 4 other students. John felt anxious and jealous because one of her neighbors was a man and the boys often visited her house. To cope, he wrote and called her constantly. However, Rachel was very busy with work and study. Since there were no mobile phones in those days, they could only communicate by landline. She would often come home at the end of the evening, exhausted, and go straight to bed. She did not have the opportunity to communicate with John regularly. His dissatisfaction increased with each missed call and he became increasingly jealous. His possessiveness became evident during this time and he complained to her, which began to annoy Rachel. On February 11th, she sent him a Valentine's card, calling him the only love of her life. However, around that time, she wrote in her diary about her lover in very unflattering terms. It seemed that she had doubts about whether John was the person she could spend the rest of her life with. On Valentine's Day, John proposed to her, but she unexpectedly refused, which shocked him. She explained that she was not ready. John said that he understood and would wait. They continued their relationship, calling each other occasionally and rarely seeing each other. 2 months later, in April, they planned to spend the Easter holidays together. John went to Blackpool again on Saturday, and Rachel's mother took her back to Oxford because she had important school matters to attend to on Sunday. They planned to have a quiet day together at her student flat, as it was their last weekend before Rachel's exams. Rachel spent a lot of time preparing for her exams. While she was studying, her boyfriend was watching football in the living room because he was a Nottingham fan. That weekend, the team played in the FA Cup semi-finals, so the next day John got on the train and returned to Nottingham. There was no one in the student flat all week because the young people had gone home for the holidays. Everyone wanted to spend time with their loved ones because they wouldn't have the chance until the end of the year. By Monday, her roommates began to return, eager to see Rachel and hear about her weekend. However, Rachel was missing. Her room was empty, the windows were open, but nothing else seemed out of the ordinary. The students assumed she was busy with other activities. On Wednesday, her boyfriend, John, tried to call her, but she did not answer. They had planned to stay in touch, but Rachel did not return his calls. John assumed that she was busy and did not want to bother her. However, after 2 days of silence, which was unusual since their relationship had only recently improved, John began to worry. He called again, but still received no response. The next day, he tried again, but was unsuccessful. There was no social media at the time, so John left a message on her answering machine. But she remained silent. He also sent her a letter by regular mail, which he sent as soon as he got home. The letter arrived in New Mexico on Thursday, and John thanked Rachel for a wonderful weekend and wished her luck with her exams. On April 19, 1991, 19-year-old Rachel failed to show up for her exam, which was especially worrying because she had been studying hard and the exam was extremely important to her. When the exam proctors tried to contact her, they were unsuccessful. Her parents also had no idea where she was, prompting them to report her missing to the police. The Oxford police were initially skeptical. They received dozens of missing student reports each month because parents went to the police station after parties. In 99% of cases, teens sobered up from drinking and returned to school within 24 hours. But that was not the case. This diligent student had been missing for days and had not been heard from at all. None of her friends knew where she was, so the police became interested in what had happened. They immediately went to the apartment where Rachel had gone missing. Detective Susie Krug was looking for information about the students who had been in the same room as Rachel. Victoria Clare, Margaret Smith, Sarah Hume, and John Forby. The friends immediately pointed to Rachel's boyfriend, who was annoying everyone with his jealousy. They showed a letter he had sent from Nottingham around the time Rachel went missing. The neighbors also confirmed that John Turner was the last person Rachel had been in contact with. The room they checked showed no signs of forced entry, robbery, struggle, or blood. Everything was in its place. The police found Rachel's diary, which might contain important clues. The police began to study the contents of the diary. They knew that John was possessive and jealous of his girlfriend, wanting to know her whereabouts and presence at all times. This behavior gradually began to annoy Rachel. Their conflicts often arose over this issue. On April 22, police met with John Turner. 22. During the conversation, John expressed concern about his missing girlfriend. He was asked to describe his activities during the time Rachel went missing. John mentioned that they had a great weekend together and that everything was fine before they broke up. He said that he woke up early, showered, and that they had sex in the afternoon. After lunch, they went to Oxford Station together at around 4:15 p.m., taking a bus. They had a few hours before their train arrived, and while waiting, they bumped into a friend of Rachel's at around 5 p.m. The three of them went to a local coffee shop and had coffee. Rachel's friend was described as a dark-skinned man with long hair, wearing ripped jeans and a black jacket. He was similar in appearance to John, except for his dark skin. John admitted that he could not remember the man's name because they had just met and he did not expect to become friends with him. According to John, the man offered to drive Rachel home in his car. She agreed, and then John and Rachel said goodbye. John returned to Nottingham, while Rachel went with her friend to her apartment. However, John's story about the man was very suspicious. The police suspected that John was lying, and he quickly became the prime suspect in Rachel's disappearance, as she had been missing for a long time, leading to concerns that she might be dead or imprisoned. Urgent action was needed. First, it was important to learn more about the prime suspect, as he was the last known person to have had contact with Rachel, and his story about a black man needed further investigation. Rachel's disappearance left everyone baffled because none of her roommates or friends remembered her having such a friend. In order to gather more witnesses, the police shared information about the case. From the beginning, there was no reason to think that she had run away. The police first checked this possibility by talking to Rachel's family and friends. Rachel had no problems with her loved ones, friends, studies, or personal life. She was eagerly preparing for exams, which made it impossible for her to not attend. Rachel never complained about any problems, nor did she suffer from drug addiction or mental problems. People like her usually do not run away, and all of her belongings were left untouched. This allowed the police to rule out the possibility that she had run away on purpose. The police were skeptical of John's testimony and assigned a police officer to approach him and gain his trust. The officer's job was to observe John's reactions and behavior while updating him on the investigation. From the beginning, the officer suspected John of lying to them, noticing that he became nervous when talking about Rachel, despite his attempts to hide it. Despite these suspicions, a week of surveillance did not reveal any useful information to help the case. Meanwhile, the police were searching the neighborhood for witnesses, K9 units were working with dogs, and divers were examining local waters. Several people remembered seeing John, but no one could confirm that he had left the house with Rachel. In addition, he had not been behaving suspiciously, so this witness's testimony did not add anything to the search. During this time, John continued to cooperate with the investigation. He even helped create a composite sketch of the man who, according to him, was supposed to drive Rachel back to her apartment. John believes this friend was responsible for her abduction. It has now been 2 weeks and police believe she is no longer alive. No ransom demands have been made, ruling out kidnapping as a motive. Search teams, including police, rescue workers and volunteers, have scoured a large area around Oxford, including drains and boating holes, but their efforts have been in vain. The police examined Rachel's diary and discovered her true feelings for John, a disturbing mix of hatred and pity. She expressed that she was unable to confront him directly or leave because she was afraid. Rachel had no genuine feelings for John, and her Valentine's Day gestures were more like a duty than a genuine expression of love. She knew that John was unstable and prone to losing control when angry. Afraid to face this reality, she admitted that their closeness was harmful and needed to end. In stark contrast, John described their relationship as happy, often emphasizing their frequent sexual activity during interrogations. Meanwhile, Rachel wrote of her disgust for him but felt powerless to stop their closeness. The police believe he may have killed her after reading her diary and discovering her true feelings, but more evidence is needed to prove his guilt. John has been actively cooperating with the investigation. He has attended a press conference to draw public attention to the search for Rachel and to help reconstruct the last day he spent with her. John describes the events at the station, claiming that a stranger, whom he says was a dark-skinned friend of Rachel's, was involved in her disappearance. The plan is to closely monitor John's reactions and behavior during these events, as experienced journalists can identify inconsistencies in his story. Many people have noted that John's description of the dark-skinned guy closely matches his appearance, including his clothing, except for his skin color. It is as if he was trying to describe himself but changing his race. In addition, the public took note of John's strange reactions when asked if he thought Rachel was still alive. He vaguely stated, in his heart, he wanted to think so, which further aroused suspicion among the conference attendees. Throughout the conversation, the guy's smile never seemed to disappear. This event greatly promoted the investigation into Rachel's disappearance. Several random witnesses who were watching the press conference on television clearly remembered the events of the day the girl disappeared at the train station. They contacted the police, saying that only John was at the cafe at the station, there was no girl or anyone else with him. Among the witnesses was a man sitting at the next table. He noticed that John seemed very nervous while drinking coffee, constantly looking around and startled. According to this witness, at one point, John took out a piece of paper and started writing. Perhaps Rachel was no longer alive at that time, and John began writing the same letter he had sent immediately after arriving in Notting. All this was done to create an alibi for himself. It has been established that John and Rachel went to the station together by bus, although there were no cameras there at that time. However, during that time in the city, all passengers who boarded the bus and paid for their tickets were monitored by special electronic devices. It was impossible to ride without paying. When checked, it was discovered that Rachel had not paid for the trip, which showed that she was not with John and could not have been there that day. Therefore, John lied. The reason for his lie remains unclear, and it is still unknown where Rachel's body could be. Police suspected that her remains might still be in the student apartment or somewhere on campus. Surveillance cameras covered the area around the building, but none of them showed John carrying any large, suspicious items. Police requested a floor plan of the student dormitory and discovered that there were voids under the floorboards. Police returned to the apartment where Rachel had lived and removed the floorboards. There, they found her body tightly packed in a bag, only 20 centimeters high. The cold weather at the time slowed the body's decomposition. In addition, the space between floors was structurally well ventilated, so the decomposing body did not emit a foul odor and was not discovered until 19 days after her death. Because Rachel's body was so well preserved, the forensic expert was able to determine the circumstances of her death with a high degree of accuracy within an hour. John was then questioned by the police. Initially, he refused to answer police questions. However, the next day, he confessed to killing Rachel. He said that after watching a football match, he proposed to Rachel, hoping that she would accept, but she refused. The couple exchanged a few words. As a result, he lost his temper and attacked her. In his confession, John admitted that he did not understand why she refused to get engaged. She did not want to answer for a long time but finally admitted that she had been having an affair and that she was not sure that she was ready to commit her life to John. In response, he insulted her. Rachel tried to hit him, and after the slap, he lost control and pinned her down on the chair with his weight, preventing her from moving. John claimed that he did not remember what happened next. When he regained consciousness, he found himself sitting on a couch in front of Rachel's lifeless body. Forensic experts confirmed that Rachel had been strangled. There was a deep, thin mark on her neck, indicating the use of an object rather than hands. The tie Rachel had given him for Christmas was missing from the crime scene and from John's belongings, believed to have been used to kill her. After a while, he decided to dispose of the body. Unable to get the body out of the building, he put it in a bag, removed the floorboards from Rachel's room, and stuffed the body into a small space. He then quietly reinstalled the floorboards. John then packed his things and headed to the bus station. While waiting for the train at a coffee shop, he wrote a letter to Rachel. In the letter, he thanked her for the weekend they spent together and mentioned a black man who was supposed to drive her home, which was a made-up story. He had invented this character to support the lie he had created. He also expressed concern for his girlfriend, who would be alone for several days. After sending the letter, he called her several times and left messages on her answering machine. John then wrote another letter, addressed to Rachel in New Mexico, saying that he had tried to call her several times during the week and was very worried, hoping she would call back soon. This deception allowed him to fool the police and the public for 19 days. Afterward, despite his confession, John Turner maintained his innocence. In December 1991, John claimed that his actions were in self-defense. He wanted to avoid a life sentence for premeditated murder, so he argued that the girl's death was accidental. Rachel was described as argumentative and unfaithful, often insulting John. John also stressed the humiliation he suffered at the hands of Rachel. He had erectile dysfunction due to the disease and claimed that she constantly criticized him for it. This was especially difficult during the outbreak when he was unable to have sex with her due to pain in his groin and abdomen. In court, his lawyer portrayed him as the victim. He was a caring man in love, dreamed of marrying Rachel and proposed to her twice, both times being rejected. Of course, all of this is not true, because judging by the diary entries, the girl was generally uncomfortable with intimate contact with John. There is no evidence that Rachel had any intrigue or relationship with anyone else. Rachel's close friends did not know about any other guy. Many believe that she made up the story of the affair to justify her quick breakup with John, but it is possible that she never actually said this, it was just his word. In the end, the jury did not believe John and he was sentenced to life in prison, with the right to parole. John's story does not end there. While serving his sentence, he developed a relationship with a 20-year-old woman who looked exactly like Rachel. She learned about him through a newspaper article and became interested, believing that he had been wrongly convicted. Despite being imprisoned, they began a romantic relationship. lawyers continued to fight for John's release and maintained his innocence. In 2003, after 11 years behind bars, John was paroled. He returned to New Zealand, intending to start his life over. His girlfriend, whom he met while in prison, followed him to New Zealand to attend university in Whanganui, the city where John lived. Apparently, 11 years in prison did not benefit John because he then attacked and began strangling the new girl, who believed he was innocent. John was 49 at the time. Fortunately, the attack was not serious and the girl was able to escape without serious injury. According to several witnesses and victims, John had lost control of his temper several times in the 6 months leading up to the incident. It was clear that he had anger management issues. John often became jealous and turned small problems into big arguments, often insulting his partner in front of others. Some time after the initial incident, the situation recurred and he attacked her again. During this time, the couple were staying at a motel in the city of Whanganui. There, they argued again. John threw his girlfriend onto the bed, raised his fists and punched her in the face while holding her down with his weight. However, he regained his composure and left the room. A few hours later, the girl texted John, saying that she was ending the relationship. She said that he was dangerous and needed to attend an anger management program. In response, he flew into a rage again, returned to the motel and stormed into the room. He attacked her, tore her clothes off, demanded sex, hit her on the head several times and threatened to kill her. In 2018, the girl reported John to the police and he was charged with assault. He was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in prison. The sentence was relatively light because the conviction occurred in New Zealand. If the attack had happened in the UK, he would have faced a life sentence. Despite the attack, his new girlfriend told the media that she believes anger management is still an issue for John and that he needs help. She hopes he can control his anger and that they can rekindle their relationship, despite the mental and physical abuse he has inflicted on her. In court, she admitted that he had threatened to kill her if she tried to leave him, although she did not take the threat seriously. John has recently been released from prison, but his current situation is unknown. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Melania Ray. This is the story of Melania Ray, a striking woman who was a drill instructor in the Ken Regiment at the time of the incident. She was married to Salvatore Paralisi and they had a 1-year-old daughter, Vittoria. The family lived in a small village called Oscolaquina, near the San Marco Plateau in Italy. At this time, tourists walking along the paths below the mountainside could not see the flowers that usually bloom on the plateau because the snow had only recently melted. However, a bar and small shops were open, allowing visitors to stroll and enjoy the view. The tragedy occurred on Monday, April 18, 2011, around 3 p.m. On that day, Salvatore arrived in the area with his young daughter after parking his car nearby. He entered a small bar, used the restroom, and then asked the locals if they had seen his wife, Melania. She had recently given birth and had gone missing. At the time, she was 28 years old, athletic, and had long dark hair. When Salvatore learned that no one had seen Melania, he became more anxious, pacing back and forth. He eventually broke down in tears, expressing his fear that his wife had been kidnapped. The people there decided to support him and his daughter by helping to search for Melania. They went out onto the porch and walked along the path from the parking lot to the bar, hoping to find any sign of her, but they found nothing. The Salvatore explained that earlier that morning, he had been with his wife. After lunch, they went to the plateau, where he played with his daughter near the swings in the playground. His wife had planned to step away briefly to buy coffee and use the restroom, but she did not return. Sensing that something was wrong, he began calling her numerous times over the past 15 minutes, but she didn't answer. He realized her phone was missing and suspected that she might have been kidnapped by people in a passing car. The Salvatore remained at the bar and spoke with the owner, Giovanna, but the longer he stayed, the more unusual his behavior seemed. First, Salvatore was inadequately dressed for a cool spring day. Second, he seemed to neglect his 1-year-old daughter while he grieved for his missing wife. The little girl wandered through the bar, grew hungry, and felt cold, but her father paid no attention to her needs, continuing to cry and recount his story about his wife's disappearance. At 4:34 p.m., a call came into the local police station from Giovanna, the owner of a bar. She called the emergency services because Salvatore had just left, reporting that he had not been able to find his wife for over an hour and was concerned that she might have been kidnapped. He had his young daughter, just over a year old, with him, and the father was clearly upset. When he returned to the bar, Giovanna handed him the phone to speak to the police. The shaky man gave the dispatcher some details about himself and his missing wife, Melania. He mentioned that she had a hernia, which may have worsened as they were near the mountains. He repeated the story he had shared with others, emphasizing that Melania had disappeared after going to the bar. Throughout the call, he spoke very softly, often mumbling and stuttering, and there were long pauses. Police had to ask nearly every question multiple times to get him to respond. When the police arrived, he repeated his story, explaining that Melania had health problems, so they were forced to go to the nearest hospital. They then decided to stop for a walk and coffee. While she was out, Salvatore stayed at the playground with their daughter, who was playing on the swings. When Melania did not return, he became concerned and tried calling her, but she did not answer. This was unusual, as she usually answered her calls. Worried about her silence, Salvatore eventually went to the bar where she was supposed to be and began asking people there if they had seen her. As time passed without any news, Salvatore grew increasingly desperate. The police asked him detailed questions about Melania's appearance and the moments leading up to her departure. Salvatore insisted that she was fine, she had just needed to use the restroom, and there was no sign of abnormal. At the scene, the police verified Salvatore's identity and began their investigation. They first conducted a quick analysis of his phone data, looking into his recent interests and searches to evaluate his credibility. The police learned about Salvatore Paralisi, born on August 28, 1987, in the province of Naples, Italy. At the time Melania went missing, he was with their daughter in Felina. His wife, Melania Ray, was born on May 24, 1982, in another small town in the province of Naples. Since both were military personnel, the Carabinieri promptly contacted their military unit for further information. To assist Salvatore, a friend of his who was also a police officer arrived at the scene. He wanted to help Salvatore take care of Vittoria. Eventually, the police were able to gather all the necessary information and then released Salvatore and his daughter. Melania's relatives were notified of the situation shortly after. They rushed to the scene to learn more about what had happened and assist in the search for Melania. During discussions with police, Salvatore acted unusually. As a military man, he knew it was important to provide accurate information to the police to help find his wife quickly. Instead, he dodged questions and slowed down the investigation. Police had to ask him for Melania's cell phone number 3 or 4 times before he shared the information. The police wanted to track Melania's mobile phone to locate her and track her movements. There were only 3 busy walkways between the bar and the playground. One was more than 100 meters long and was mostly visible from the kiosk cameras. The second was much longer and led to the War Memorial, a destination that often has a lot of people passing by. The third walkway, 150 meters long, was also closely monitored by cameras. Surprisingly, however, nothing was seen. The cameras did not record any footage of Melania, raising doubts about whether she had been in the area that day. Data shows that Melania's cell phone was last active at 2:45 p.m., just before she went missing. The activity was near the location where she had been staying with Salvatore and Vittoria. Unfortunately, this information did not lead to any further details. The only hope for the search lay with the National Mountain Rescue Service. Experts were called in to help, bringing equipment and sniffer dogs. Dogs' sense of smell is so acute that they can follow a scent for up to 20 days after being left behind. The dog quickly oriented itself and followed the asphalt road to the monument. At that point, the trail appeared to end, suggesting that Melania may have gotten into the car and driven away. However, Salvatore later mentioned that they had been in the area just over a week ago. This leaves two possibilities: the dog was following Melania's old scent, or she had actually been abducted. Afterward, the police took Salvatore to the station for questioning. There, he recounted all the details of the day leading up to Melania's disappearance. According to him, she visited a physiotherapist around 11:30 a.m. They then went to a supermarket and later visited the San Marco clinic, where doctors diagnosed her with an inguinal hernia. After lunch, they returned home to change clothes before going for a walk with their daughter. Salvatore noted that they had been in the area for the past month, making Melania very familiar with the territory. Salvatore mentioned that he and Melania had gone to a bar together during their visit. After gathering all the necessary information, the police sent Salvatore home. The main theory of the police was kidnapping, based on information gathered with the help of sniffer dogs. They believed that Melania had approached the road, was abducted, and her trail suddenly ended. All the evidence suggested that she may have been forced into the car. In May, Salvatore appeared on television to share his story, revealing new details. He mentioned that he and his wife had a small picnic near the war memorial and were relaxing there on the day she disappeared. Salvatore also described the clothes and accessories Melania was wearing when she went missing. Interestingly, he noted that she did not have her handbag with her personal belongings at that time. She was wearing casual clothes and several gold ornaments. However, it was puzzling how a responsible woman could embark on a long trip with a child without any preparation or a handbag. She didn't even have money or cigarettes, which she usually smoked. Melania also forgot to bring a milk bottle and clothes for her daughter. Another point of confusion was how she could have gone to the bar to buy her husband coffee if she had no money. Salvatore's statements became increasingly contradictory, leading to suspicions that he might be lying. With these concerns in mind, the police decided to question Salvatore again to learn more. Salvatore claimed that they had a strong relationship and that they sometimes disagreed on various issues. But these disagreements never escalated into conflict. In general, they had a great, strong family, which was confirmed by relatives and friends. Therefore, the Salvatore was released. The next day, Melania's relatives arrived in town and stayed at a small apartment near the Salvatore home. Although exhausted from the trip, they made it a priority to visit the police station to ask about the investigation. They provided any information that could help locate Melania as quickly as possible. It was discovered that Melania had two phones that Salvatore did not mention. One phone was used to contact her husband and friends. The other phone was used to talk to her mother and close relatives. At 1:34 p.m. on the day Melania went missing, her mother-in-law called the second number. They had a conversation that lasted about 9 minutes, during which Melania shared details about the day. She mentioned that her family was going to San Marco to go for a walk and attend the christening of a friend's child at around 4 p.m. The call ended at 1:43 p.m., and there was no further communication. The police got no new information out of Salvatore. His testimony was largely a rehash of what they already knew. The police were puzzled by his decision to stay with the child. They questioned why Melania didn't bring Vittoria along when she went out for coffee. The trip from their house to the park took less than 20 minutes. Did Melania really need to go to the bathroom during that time? And most importantly, where did the girl go afterward? Melania's relatives moved into the Salvatore home and spoke to him regularly about the situation, but he remained quiet and sad, often avoiding their questions. Salvatore's relatives tried to support him as much as possible, helping him care for Vittoria. On April 19, 2011, the entire city learned of Melania's disappearance. This was shocking, as the suburb was known to be one of the quietest and most peaceful areas in the area. Although the police suspected Salvatore, he had no previous legal problems. Salvatore frequently appeared on various television shows, discussing the tragedy he was facing. To clarify what had happened that morning, police checked Salvatore's cell phone. They found that it had been on from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. but then turned off until 6 p.m. That same day, Salvatore drove to Plateau Sanmar, where the armed forces, police, and search teams were working. However, he showed little interest in the search efforts or their progress. Instead, he returned the sweatshirt he had borrowed from Giovanna, a bar owner, on the day Melania went missing and quickly left, claiming that he had to go to work. His behavior aroused suspicion among the police. While examining Salvatore's mobile phone, the Carabinieri found something noteworthy. He had been in constant communication with a girl named Lodovica for the past month, exchanging thousands of messages and making calls almost every day. It became clear that he was having a romantic affair with her. Salvatore had fallen in love with Lodovica Pero in September 2009. And their relationship continued even at home in 2011, after Melania went missing. In the summer of 2009, Melania discovered his infidelity and was furious. At the time, she moved in with her parents and she was pregnant with their daughter. Despite this, Salvatore continued to pursue Lodovica, who was 27 at the time and working in their military unit. Eventually, for the sake of their child, Salvatore and Melania reconciled, and she returned home. However, his love affair continued. He often rented an apartment to see Lodovica. After completing her training, Lodovica was sent to Rome, but their relationship continued. Salvatore spent most of his free time talking to her on the phone. Their conversations showed that Lodovica wanted more than a long-distance relationship, but Melania's presence got in the way. In the months leading up to Melania's disappearance, there had been tension between Lodovica and Salvatore. Lodovica wanted him to be with her, and he kept delaying their time together. Melania was determined to keep their marriage intact, especially after discovering that her husband was still seeing Lodovica. She even threatened to expose his relationship with his mistress, which could have jeopardized Salvatore's job. This threat scared him, causing him to distance himself from Lodovica. Melania believed that her tactics had worked, thinking that their relationship was back to normal and that Salvatore's feelings for Lodovica were just a passing love. Melania was determined not to give in. She wanted to resume their relationship, while Lodovica was urging him to leave his family for her. He found himself caught between two women. The situation escalated to the point where, on April 19th, Salvatore traveled to Rome to meet Lodovica's parents, hoping they could start a life together. The issue was that Melania was completely unaware of this plan. At the same time, he was supposed to be spending the holidays with his family, including Melania and their daughter. Just a day before this meeting. However, his wife went missing. This turn of events seemed very suspicious, as love triangles rarely have happy endings. When Salvatore returned to work after his wife went missing, management suggested a rescue operation. They suggested assembling a team of soldiers and using specialized equipment. However, Salvatore remained remarkably calm and insisted that such an operation was unnecessary. He believed that his wife had left him out of resentment, so no operations needed to be organized. Salvatore then deleted his social media accounts, which he had used to communicate with Ludovica. This led the police to discover a potential motive for the crime. By now, the crucial time to find the missing person alive had passed. The police took the situation seriously and concluded that they had no chance of finding Melania alive. The search dog used in the investigation did not detect new traces or scent of Melania. On April 23, police received a call from an unknown man who identified himself as a mushroom picker. He reported seeing the body of a woman 17 kilometers from Felina. Police arrived at the scene shortly after. The body was found to be Melania's. Forensic experts discovered multiple injuries on her body during the autopsy. These injuries were consistent with stab wounds caused by small knives, mainly to the head and neck. There were also injuries to her chest and some self-defense wounds. Although Melania was not raped, significant evidence was collected from the scene, including her cell phone, a bloody lighter, a water bottle, and traces of a small car. The most important piece of evidence was a grocery store receipt from the morning of April 18th. Additionally, insulin syringes were found nearby, suggesting that Melania may have been abusing drugs. However, a toxicology report confirmed that there were no traces of alcohol or illegal drugs in Melania's system. The police received information from Salvatore about an interesting coincidence. A few days before Melania went missing, she and her husband had an intimate encounter in the same area behind the kiosk where her body was later discovered. Somehow, this information reached Ludovica, who was furious, having been lied to. He had repeatedly assured Ludovica that he was no longer intimate with his wife. This revelation only added to the complexity surrounding their relationship. However, on the day of their encounter, it was snowing and very cold, making it unlikely that they would engage in intimate relations outdoors. Additionally, it was known that Melania was experiencing pain from an inguinal hernia at that time. Given these factors, the narrative of a passionate encounter at the kiosk doesn't seem reasonable. However, this is just an assumption that needs to be proven. The police conducted a thorough search of the surrounding area for any traces of blood. They discovered various pieces of evidence, including shoe prints. In order to gather more information about the suspect, it was important to determine who was in the area at the time of the victim's death. During that time, soldiers from Salvatore's and Melania's regiments were present. In fact, the soldiers accidentally left behind some evidence, such as a water bottle, a store receipt, and shoe prints. This complicating factor hindered the police investigation because much of this evidence was irrelevant to the case. Additionally, the soldiers reported that they did not see anyone suspicious that day and confirmed that no body was present. The police decided to examine Ludovica more closely. They discovered that she did not leave the barracks on April 18th to 19th, providing her with a solid alibi for the time of the crime. Ludovica also shared crucial information, stating that on April 17th, she had spoken with Salvatore about their relationship. During this conversation, Salvatore mentioned that his wife was cheating on him. It was revealed that Ludovica was not Salvatore's only affair. He had previous relationships with other soldiers and women. Although Ludovica was aware of this, she did not consider it significant. Ultimately, it was uncovered that the Salvatore had been involved with several women simultaneously. Salvatore was aware that the police had obtained this information and feared it could be seen as a motive for the murder of Melania. To gather evidence against Salvatore, police installed a wiretap in his car and also eavesdropped on his telephone conversations. This yielded crucial information. Salvatore often talked to himself in the car about his wife's murder, raising suspicions of his involvement in Melania's death. Police obtained permission to search Salvatore's car with luminol, discovering traces of blood inside. Samples were sent to a lab, and subsequent testing confirmed the blood belonged to Melania. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office was developing its theory to understand the motive behind the crime. They believed that Melania was a controlling person who harbored deep resentment towards her husband for his many betrayals, yet she kept him around for the sake of their child. This constant pressure worsened their situation. He sought an escape by starting a relationship with Ludovica, who also exerted pressure on him. In this relationship, he felt like a third wheel, leading him to consider getting rid of his difficult wife. Forensic experts have submitted their full report, confirming the findings of the medical examiner. They determined that Melania died between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. on April 18th from 35 stab wounds. It is likely that the attack occurred while she was urinating, as evidenced by her squatting position and an empty bladder. The attacker probably approached her from behind and struck when she least expected it, leaving little chance for her to defend herself. The nature of the wounds indicated that the assault was particularly brutal, stemming from personal animosity. It was confirmed that Melania never reached the plateau on the day she died, based on geolocation data from her mobile phone. The prosecutor's office believed they stopped near the kiosks in the pine forest, where they allegedly engaged in sexual intercourse. This occurred around 2:30 p.m., and it was at this point that Salvatore unexpectedly attacked and killed Melania. Afterwards, he returned home, changed his clothes, took their young daughter, and went straight to San Marco, where he entered a bar and pretended to be a heartbroken husband whose wife had left him. Despite his claims of innocence, the jury found the evidence against him compelling. As a result, Salvatore Paralisi was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay €2 million to Melania's family. Salvatore maintains his innocence and is currently serving his sentence in a reformatory in Milan. Custody of Melania's daughter was given to her family. Now 13, Vittoria has expressed her desire to change her last name to her mother's. She does not visit her father and would rather he not know about her choices. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing case. The case of David Viennes. In California, a man jumped off a cliff into the raging waves. A woman who knew him watched in amazement. The jumper was David Viennes, a successful businessman and celebrity chef who owned a popular restaurant chain. What could have motivated such a successful man to take such a drastic action? The situation was more complicated than it seemed, as David was the prime suspect in a serious criminal case at the time of his jump. According to his friends, David Viennes was charismatic, intelligent, and attracted attention wherever he went. David began dating Dawn in the early 90s while working as a chef at a restaurant where she worked as a waitress. At the time, he had 3 children from previous relationships who lived with their mother, but he remained involved in their lives. David focused on the future, leaving behind his past problems and mistakes. David and Dawn's relationship progressed quickly, leading to their marriage in 1997. At that time, David owned a successful chain of restaurants, which provided him with both fame and a stable income. They tied the knot in Lomita, California, a small town with a population of 20,000 known for its safety and low crime rates, making it an ideal setting for their wedding. A close family friend, Joko Knights, who ran a small auto repair shop, became someone they trusted deeply. Through their friendship, Joko learned some private details about their lives, including that David had a domineering personality and that Dawn sometimes struggled with alcohol. Dawn's addiction escalated to the point where she began drinking early in the morning, hiding the bottles so her husband wouldn't find out she had been drinking. She drank to cope with David's cruelty. To hide her finances from her husband, she asked a family friend named Joe to keep her money. According to him, she last gave him money on October 18, 2009. And Dawn had saved over $1,000. The following Monday, Dawn did not show up for work. Her car was parked near her house, but she was missing. Worried, Joe asked David where his wife was, and David replied that she had left the house. He explained that she felt pressured by her husband, so she wanted to go to alcohol withdrawal. Joe is skeptical of David's answer. He begins to monitor David's behavior and realizes that Katie Galvin, one of the waitresses, is having an affair with him. Katie used to work at David's restaurant, and she is now trying to replace Dawn. Dawn is still unreachable, her phone is turned off, and her car is still parked at home. This raises the question, where could Dawn have gone without a car? Joe observes that Dawn's belongings are thrown out. After failing to contact Dawn, her friends filed a police report. David kept telling everyone the same story. They had an argument, and she left, taking only her expensive Louis Vuitton bag. It was strange that she left her car behind, since it was necessary to get around in that small town, which had no airport or train station. She would have needed her own transportation to leave. It seemed unlikely that a rich woman like Dawn would take the intercity bus. While investigating David's past, police found out that he was not only a skilled cook but also sold large quantities of weed. He had been involved in this activity before 2009. His restaurant business was thriving, so he didn't need to closely oversee it. This gave him the opportunity to focus on distributing drugs to small dealers. In 2005, David was arrested for drug trafficking, revealing that this was not his first offense. He had been convicted of similar activities in 1993. David worked as a police informant, always available and assisting when needed. This cooperation led to the dismantling of a citywide drug trafficking network, for which he served only 1 year in prison. In 2008, after being released from prison, David got married and moved to Lomita with Dawn, where they lived until the unfortunate events of 2009. When his wife mysteriously disappeared, he asked his daughter, Jackie, to accompany him to the restaurant to help with the business. Jackie helped with the business, while Katie was his mistress and aspired to be Mrs. David in the future. Jackie was 19 years old at the time. David kept telling everyone the same story about his wife, Dawn's disappearance, that they had a fight and she left him. However, Jackie suspected that her father was not telling the truth. Jackie directly asked her father where Dawn was. David shocked her by admitting that he had accidentally killed Dawn and asked his daughter to keep quiet and not call the police. Jackie agreed. Meanwhile, the police began to suspect David. In response, he took drastic action by asking his new girlfriend Katie to send text messages from Dawn's phone, pretending that everything was fine and there was no need to worry. David thought that once the police saw these messages, they would close the case. However, these messages only raised suspicions. This was because Dawn always signed her messages with the nickname Pixie, but Katie made a mistake and wrote the nickname wrong. The police obtained a search warrant for the David family home and conducted an inspection. They discovered blood in the bedroom and another room, but the stains were old and showed signs of attempted removal, making them unusable as evidence. 16 months after the Dawn's disappearance, it was impossible to find proof of the David's guilt. Although the police were almost certain that the David had killed Dawn, they lacked solid evidence against him. The only lead was the blood found in the house, which ultimately led nowhere. Reporters closely followed the case from the beginning, as it was a novel event in the area. This media attention benefited the investigation by keeping the suspect on edge, as people under pressure tend to make mistakes. One day, a reporter visited a restaurant and loudly claimed that David's entire house was covered in blood. This was a bluff. But it had the effect. David became anxious, and the reporter was expelled from the restaurant. The police decided to question David's daughter, Jackie. 2 police officers met her and took a confession from her. Jackie told them what had happened and then called her father, warning him that the police would be coming to arrest him until a warrant was issued. The press learned of the details and published the story on February 23, 2011. Overwhelmed, David confessed everything to his girlfriend, Katie Galvin. He claimed it was an accident and expressed that he did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison, saying that ending his life was the better option. After saying this, he rushed to his car, and Katie followed him. Despite the situation, Katie felt calm, believing that he would not harm her. They reached the cliff where David had left Katie in the car. He ran and jumped off the cliff. Amazingly, the 25-meter fall was not fatal for David. He survived. However, David's body had many broken bones. He was rescued from the cliff by a helicopter and taken to the hospital. If he had jumped head first, he would have died, but fate had other plans. A few days later, he confessed to the police from his hospital bed. He mentioned that the most recent conflict with his wife was due to Dawn's bad habits. She was not only abusing alcohol but also addicted to illegal drugs. His daughter confirmed his testimony. David explained that their conflict on the night of the incident was due to illegal substances. He came home after midnight, exhausted from working 90 hours a week. All he wanted was to relax, but he anticipated that his wife would return under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Since she wasn't home yet, he locked the bedroom door to avoid being disturbed and went to sleep. Later, when his wife returned and tried to enter the bedroom, he told her to sleep in another room and not to bother him. The Dawn became angry and burst into the bedroom, breaking the lock, and started hitting David in the face. Afterwards, she ran into the living room. David followed Dawn, saw the substances she had, took them away, and threw them in the sink. In response, she acted aggressively and lunged at him. To protect himself, David used table tape to bind her hands to prevent her from moving, attacking, or throwing anything at him. He mentioned that he had to deal with his wife's psychoses this way more than once. He restrained her and left her there until the effects of the substances faded. While she screamed in anger, David just wanted peace and ended up taping her mouth shut. He went to bed around 3 in the morning. In the morning, as was his habit, he rolled over to his wife's side but found her gone. He fell asleep again, forgetting that she was still tied up in the living room. When he woke up and went downstairs, he found Dawn dead. David realized that under the influence of drugs, she had started to feel nauseous and choked because her mouth was taped shut. In despair, he felt that his life was over. But he didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. So he decided to dispose of her body. He carefully packed it and took it to his restaurant. David describes how he used a large vat in the restaurant to dip his wife in water and boil her for 4 days to tenderize the meat. He then cut her body into pieces, put them in garbage bags, and dumped them in a dumpster. When the garbage truck collects the restaurant's food waste, the remains of a boiled human being would likely go unnoticed because they would be unrecognizable. It is hard to understand how this could have happened when the restaurant was open at the time. During the investigation, restaurant staff claimed that they did not remember anything suspicious. The story seemed unbelievable and many people doubted David's testimony. Nearly 2 years later, David, now in a wheelchair, appeared in court. After the first hearing, he dismissed his lawyer, believing that the lawyer was not effectively handling his case. The prosecution suggested a possible motive for the murder. David had previously complained that Dawn had stolen about $200 from the restaurant cash register. During the trial, David claimed that after 17 years of marriage, he would never intentionally harm his wife, especially over such a small amount of money. He found it ridiculous to be charged with first-degree murder for such a trivial reason. David maintained that he had always provided for his wife, buying her expensive clothes. However, the prosecutor portrayed David as a cold-blooded and cruel killer who had planned the murder in advance. The Dawn feared her husband and saved money to leave him, but she ran out of time. The jury deliberated for over 5 hours on the case. David Viennes was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2023 after serving 15 years. Currently, he remains incarcerated but could be released at any time. The remains of Dawn Viennes have never been located. Despite extensive searches at the dump, David claimed he hid his wife's skull and jawbone in his mother's attic, but the police were unable to find any evidence there. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Marie Robards. Stephen Robards and Beth Burrows grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. Stephen, whose father owned a small insurance agency, was a well-known figure at school. Beth, a talented athlete in track and field, volleyball, and basketball. Stephen and Beth fell in love in high school and married in 1972. When Beth turned 18, shortly after her boyfriend signed a 4-year contract to serve in the Navy on July 10th, they welcomed daughter, Marie, that same year. Because of Stephen's military service, the family moved frequently between different naval bases. This lifestyle was challenging for Beth. After Stephen completed his service, they returned to Fort Worth. Beth often criticized her husband and described their relationship as a teenage romance, but over time, the love faded and the daily challenges made things worse. Additionally, Stephen's temper and jealousy added to the strain on their relationship, causing Beth to file for divorce in 1979. Marie Robards, their daughter, was a well-behaved student who excelled in her studies. She played the clarinet in the school orchestra and took art and dance lessons during after-school activities. Because her father was in the military, they moved frequently, which made it challenging for Marie to constantly change schools and friends at first. However, she gradually adjusted and became more open and sociable with her new classmates and teachers. After her parents divorced, Marie and her mother, Beth, relocated to a nearby city, while her father stayed in their previous home. Stephen lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in Fort Worth, and Marie, along with Beth, visited him no more than twice a month. In the 1980s, Beth began a relationship with Frank Rouse, a former Navy officer she met while her husband was stationed in Florida. At first, they were just chatting, but after Beth's divorce, they developed a relationship and decided to live together. After leaving the Navy, Frank became a police officer in a small Texas town about an hour outside of Fort Worth, with a population of about 10,000. Frank had also recently gone through a divorce and had full custody of his son, the same age as Beth's daughter, Marie. In 1981, Beth married Frank, but their marriage soon hit a rough patch. Beth had to work, so she spent little time with her husband and children, making it difficult for them to bond. This problem remained unresolved and became more serious when Marie turned 16. One day, she came home to find Frank in bed with another woman. Marie was furious and told her mother immediately, but instead of ending the relationship, Beth remained calm. During this time, Beth worked in the emergency room at a local hospital, which kept her away from home for long hours. As a result, she rarely saw Frank and did not spend much time with her daughter. Beth did not blame Frank for their distance. Instead, she felt responsible because she believed she should have spent more time with him. However, Marie was frustrated and thought that Frank was not good enough for her mother, urging Beth to divorce him. Beth, on the other hand, wanted to handle her own relationships and asked Marie not to interfere. As she grew older, Marie began to distance herself from her family. She often argued with Frank and pointed out his shortcomings. Eventually, Beth had to choose between Marie and Frank. Marie declared that if Beth did not divorce him, she would leave the house. Beth disagreed with her daughter's wishes. Even though Marie started packing, Beth didn't change her mind. She decided that Marie should stay with her maternal relatives in Fort Worth instead of going to her biological father's house. Beth contacted these relatives, who assisted Marie in enrolling in a new school. Marie moved, but after only 5 days in Fort Worth, she had spent all her money and wanted to return home to her mother. At this time, Frank's son chose to live with his biological mother, but soon became unhappy and wanted to return. However, Frank refused to let him return. Now, Marie was faced with a similar situation, and she was not allowed to return home either. The rule that if someone left home, they could not return, created a lot of tension. Beth felt that Frank was forcing her to choose between him and Marie. Many people supported Frank's stance, believing that children should not have a back-and-forth relationship with their parents, as this led to conflict and problems. Frank was steadfast in his beliefs and wanted to prevent such problems. He thought he was promoting discipline and trying to avoid constant chaos and tension. It is important to note that Frank was a former military man, known for his decisiveness and discipline. Marie had to accept the situation. At this point, she had lost respect for Frank because of his affair, but after recent events, she had come to hate Frank. Marie left Fort Worth and moved into a rented apartment. Meanwhile, Beth tried to convince her husband to let them reunite. She believed that this was just a temporary situation and that Marie would return soon. Unfortunately, despite her efforts, Frank was unyielding and never allowed Marie back. Beth felt trapped in this situation. The strain on their relationship led her to seek help from a psychologist. Marie then decided to move back in with her father, Stephen. Marie's decision to return seemed to stem from desperation. Stephen was happy to have his daughter back. At the time, he was living alone and struggling with depression. He later found work as a mailman and became romantically involved with Sandra Hudgens, who lived in the same apartment complex as him. During this time, they lived in a small, cramped one-room apartment. Marie slept on a cot in the kitchen. Steve realized that his daughter was struggling, so he tried to cheer her up. He took her to the movies and outings regularly. However, Sandra felt that these efforts did not make much of a difference. Marie's academic performance declined, and she frequently called Beth, asking to come home. She missed her mother's love and attention. Marie was unhappy with her father's cooking and cleaning and sometimes cried on the phone, begging to come home. She expressed her dislike of the new school and complained about her father's small living space. Marie is confused as to why her mother favors Frank over her and feels that her mother will not stand up to him. Beth, her mother, explained that she felt helpless because her husband would not let her visit Marie. Marie eventually began to write in her diary about her thoughts of ending her life. When her father found out about this, he was very worried and immediately informed Beth. It turns out Marie exaggerated her emotions to get attention. As the months passed, things stabilized. Marie seemed to be adjusting. Her grades improved significantly. She was able to connect with her classmates and everything seemed to be back to normal. Marie's emotions stabilized as well. She had completely adapted to her new environment. According to Sandra, Marie never had any conflicts with her father, was respectful to him and remained calm. Stephen did his best to support her. However, behind Marie's calm exterior, there was something darker. After 3 years, Marie moved back in with her father. On February 18th, Stephen ordered Mexican food for dinner. After the meal, he planned to attend a church service. About an hour later, Stephen returned to his apartment complex, complaining of severe stomach pain and feeling very unwell. Maria, along with Sandra, went to check on him after hearing that he was unwell. When they arrived, Stephen was in pain, shaking, foaming at the mouth, and having difficulty breathing. The ambulance arrived shortly after, but it was too late. They tried to insert a breathing tube, but his airway had closed. Stephen was rushed to the hospital, but he died on the way. Maria was in shock, staring at her father and trying to hide her emotions from Sandra. She had no idea what had really happened, because Stephen's death was not an accident. Hours after the incident, Frank and Beth learned that Stephen was dead. They had to take Marie home, something she had wanted for a long time. After an autopsy, the medical examiner concluded that Stephen had died of a heart attack, identifying symptoms such as chest pain, nausea, and difficulty breathing. The case seemed straightforward and that Stephen's death was due to a heart attack. He did not perform toxicology tests. Even if they wanted to run those tests, the lab didn't have the equipment needed to detect the poison in Stephen's blood. After the burial, Maria stayed by her father's grave, remaining in shock even after everyone else had left. Following the funeral, her mother Beth approached her, visibly upset, and shared her plans to break up with Frank and move to Panama City, Florida, with Maria. However, Maria began to have difficulty breathing in panic, and it took her a long time to calm down. Beth believed that Maria's grief was due to the death of her father Stephen, unaware of the deeper issues at play. Marie and Beth then moved to Panama City. Beth found a job as a clerk at the Department of Motor Vehicles and enrolled her daughter in school. Things seemed to improve, but Marie continued to struggle with depression. Her mother suspected that this was related to her father's death. Beth blamed herself for what had happened. As a high school senior, Marie saw a psychologist who diagnosed her with major depression. Marie's mother recalled the serious problems Stephen had faced and was concerned that his mental health problems might be affecting Marie. To help Marie cope with her depression, she sought the help of a psychiatrist. Things changed when Frank came to Panama City hoping to reconcile with Beth, believing that he needed to devote more time to their marriage and change his attitude towards raising their children. Surprisingly, Beth forgave her unfaithful husband once again. Marie was surprised by her mother's decision. She expressed her unwillingness to live with Frank, who had been unfaithful to Beth, and said that she missed Texas and wanted to live with her mother without any men. However, Beth decided to move in with Frank. In response, Marie contacted her grandfather, Jim, and asked if she could live with him in Mansfield. The family agreed, and Marie moved in with her grandfather. Marie became an outstanding granddaughter, an excellent student, and very polite. She was deeply engaged in the lives of her family and friends. Marie continued to pursue her passion for art and showed interest in journalism. She was intelligent and attractive, yet she dressed simply and never acted impulsively. She always returned home on time, didn't drink at parties, and avoided dating, even though many boys showed interest in her. Eventually, Marie formed a friendship with one of the most popular girls at school, Stacy. Stacy believed that Marie had gone through something traumatic, though she could not fathom how severe it truly was. In January 1994, Marie and Stacy spent the night together, studying Shakespeare's Hamlet. As Stacy read the part about poisoning, Marie suddenly looked pale and unwell. Concerned, Stacy asked her what was wrong. At first, she thought Marie might be upset about the possibility of pregnancy, but Marie denied it. Stacy then asked Marie if she had crashed her grandfather's car, but she shook her head in response. Stacy joked, "You didn't kill anyone, did you?" Marie became quiet and then asked an unusual question. She wanted to know how her friend felt about such events happening in real life. Stacy paused to think. Marie attempted to stand up from the couch but quickly collapsed back in tears, confessing that she had poisoned her father. Overwhelmed by her emotions, she could no longer contain her guilt. The Marie then recounted the story of the murder. She explained that in early February 1993, during a chemistry class, she had poured a substance from a bottle into a napkin, which she later put in her backpack. That evening, she added a bit of poison to her father's meal, and subsequently she endured a long struggle with guilt over her actions. After Marie confessed, she pleaded with Stacy to keep it a secret. Marie had only shared this information with Stacy. She revealed that she had access to a deadly poison that is nearly impossible to detect. This poison can quickly cause a heart attack, leading to death that appears natural. However, Marie claimed she was unaware of its lethal potential at the time. She only wanted her father to become ill so that her mother would care for her. Stacy eventually told her mother everything, and they were both shocked. The mother contacted the Poison Control Center to inquire if the substance could be fatal. The lab technicians sensed something was off and declined to provide an answer. The mother then hung up the phone. Marie felt lost and unsure of what to do. At first, she kept it a secret. She struggled with her feelings for a long time, but eventually convinced herself that it was just a cruel prank. Stacy suggested that Marie talk to a psychologist or a priest to share her feelings. However, things did not improve. In February 1994, on the first anniversary of Stephen's death, Jim took Marie and her friend Stacy out to dinner. As Jim raised a glass in remembrance, both girls burst into tears. For several weeks, Stacy was tormented by feelings of guilt and nightmares until she finally decided to reach out to the school counselor and confided in her friend. Although it sounded strange, her friend took the matter seriously and contacted the police, hoping to find answers. The police lab did not have the necessary equipment to investigate the results, making everything futile. Stacy also began to distance herself from Marie. She wanted to avoid all contact with Marie. Their friendship eventually fell apart. Meanwhile, Marie believed that everything had been forgotten, unaware that there was an investigation going on. In October 1994, a Fort Worth police officer contacted Stacy, saying that the toxicology results were back. They revealed that Stephen Robards had indeed been poisoned. He had received a dose 250 times higher than the fatal dose, suggesting that it was premeditated murder. Marie was arrested while studying at the University of Texas at Austin, where many people considered her sweet and harmless. She confessed immediately. Marie said that she never intended to kill her father. She just wanted to make him sick so she could reunite with her mother. Unfortunately, she miscalculated the dose and accidentally caused Stephen's death. Many people found it hard to believe that Marie could have done such an act, and some even blamed her mother for the situation. They believed that her mother's abandonment had caused Marie distress. They felt that Marie was not supposed to be with her mother, which caused her to take drastic actions to get her attention. Marie first appeared in court for a preliminary hearing on October 28, 1994, but she was released on bail and placed in the custody of her mother. A major issue now is whether Marie should be treated as a minor or an adult. Since she was 17 at the time of poisoning her father and is legally considered a minor. On March 30, 1995, Marie Robards was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. It was decided that she would be tried as an adult. Her mother posted $10,000 bail, allowing Marie to move back in with Frank and Beth while she awaited her trial. She was 19 at the time. Marie's mother used the money Marie received from Stephen's life insurance policy, totaling $60,000, to hire two experienced attorneys from Fort Worth. Their defense strategy was based on the argument that Marie wanted her father sick, but did not intend to kill him. Her goal was simply to get back to her mother. The prosecutor's office argued that the actions were motivated by malicious intent, particularly due to the insurance money that Marie received. In this case, the prosecution suggested pressing charges for first-degree murder. Testifying for the prosecution was Marie's best friend, Stacy, who provided details about the emotional state of the Marie. The defense called a psychiatrist to testify, who stated that Marie was not a cold-blooded killer and was merely suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder due to guilt over killing her father. Throughout the hearing, Marie sat silently, often covering her face and crying. Although Marie expressed remorse and expressed her love for her father, the prosecutor claimed that her feelings were not genuine. The prosecution argued that the poisoning showed premeditated murder, arguing that a stomachache alone did not justify returning to her mother. Instead, it implied a desire to kill. At the time, a friend of Marie's mentioned that Marie was considering various ways to reunite with her mother. Marie thought that if she burned down her father's apartment, her mother would come get her. However, no one took Marie seriously. Everyone believed that she was joking. Beth felt guilty about the situation. During the trial, she expressed that if she had left Frank sooner and moved to Florida with Marie, this tragedy could have been avoided. Marie's grandfather, Jim, pleaded for mercy for his granddaughter, asserting that she could not have killed the man she loved. The prosecutor asked for a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 35 years. It is possible that the pleas of family members for a lighter sentence, combined with Marie's emotional expression, influenced the decision. Marie Robards was ultimately sentenced to 28 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 7 years. After the verdict, the lawyers immediately appealed, arguing that the prosecution had presented insufficient evidence about Marie's mental state. However, in 1998, the appeal was denied and she was sent to prison. In a conversation with her mother, Marie expressed that she did not want Stacy to feel guilty about the events that had occurred. Marie believed that Stacy's actions were justified. Marie ultimately served 8 years in prison before being released in 2003. She had since married and changed her name.